Maribel currently Maribel currently serves at the pleasure of Virginia Governor Ralph S. Northam as the Director of Appointments and the Secretary of the Commonwealth's Office. She facilitates the appointment process for over 300 state boards and commissions, or about 800 appointments each year. She bridges communication between constituents, state agencies, governor's cabinet, and organizations who want to share a voice in their government. Her vision is to have each board and commission reflect the Virginia that exists today. Maribel also serves as the director of Latino outreach, connecting the Hispanic and Latino community to resources and services. And Maribel is proudly from Guerrero, Mexico. Maribel, thank you so very much. And I know that you have a great message for us from the governor, Governor Ralph Northam. Thank you for being here.
Yes, thank you, Beatriz, so much for the kind introduction. I want to thank Edgar Aranda and the Planning Committee and partners for allowing me to welcome each one of you today to the 12th Virginia Immigrants Advocates Summit. This is an incredible event that you've created since 2010 to bring stakeholders, leaders, and neighbors together to discuss the issues that are impacting the immigrant community today. Thank you all for joining us today. First and foremost, I am a proud Virginia immigrant. As Beatriz said, I have had the honor to serve Virginia as the Director of Latino Outreach, and I've had the pleasure of working with a number of you over the last 4 years. Together, we've accomplished so much, but we know that the work is not over. We've made big changes, we've passed new laws, we've opened new doors, but I'll let Governor Ralph S. Northam share what we've accomplished together in a video message. The governor really wanted to be here today with you all, but he's currently on a trade mission abroad, so we hope that his video message will resonate with you all.
Hello, I'm Governor Ralph Northam, and I want to thank you all for joining the 12th Virginia Immigrant Advocate Summit. I would like to thank Edgar Aranda, Executive Director of the Virginia Coalition of Latino Organizations, and the rest of the incredible organizers for hosting this summit. We are a nation of immigrants. In fact, 1 in 8 Virginia residents is an immigrant, and our communities are stronger for it. So many of our incredible community leaders work hard to reduce barriers for immigrants and advocate for new changes. I thank each one of you for your advocacy. Together, we have passed historic pieces of legislation like expanding access to in-state tuition for all, driver privilege cards, preventions for wage theft, housing protections, and new laws to advance police and criminal justice reform. This past General Assembly session, we expanded funding for language access and expanded health coverage to undocumented pregnant women in Virginia. Last year, I signed legislation to establish the Virginia Office of New Americans and the Office of New Americans Advisory Board to advise our administration on how to best support our immigrant communities. Earlier this year, I sent a letter to President Biden and his administration asking for a pathway to citizenship for immigrant essential workers and their families, which would grant legal status for about 140,000 Virginians. This past September, I established the governor's executive leadership team on immigrant integration. This team represents a whole of government approach to work across secretariats and state agencies to ensure that Virginia's refugee, resettlement, and immigrant integration systems are strong enough to provide for the arrival of new refugees and other new immigrants making their home in Virginia. Our goal is to make sure people feel welcome in their new home so they can live, contribute, and thrive in Virginia. Again, this would not have been possible without you and the organizations you represent. Together, we can continue to make our Commonwealth a rich and welcoming place for everyone.
Well, thank you so very much for those very encouraging words from the governor. And I know that the history of this administration is historical. And we ask you, Maribel, to please convey our appreciation to Governor Northam from all of us.
I absolutely will. Thank you all again for your time, for your commitment and support of the immigrant community. It's really your hard work and dedication that has made this administration possible, and I will certainly convey those words. Thanks, Beatriz. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so very much. And now let's go back. I am going to have a couple of announcements. Again, I am going to ask that everybody please silence their microphones. And I am going to ask everyone to please speak very slowly because we have somebody translating for all of us. And as of now, let me go into the program that we have. First of all, we want to tell you that this summit is organized by the American Civil Liberties Union, People Power Fairfax, Centerville Immigration Forum, Congregation Action Network, Dar al-Hijra Islamic Center, Drive Virginia Forward, Dreamer Mothers in Action, Edu-Futuro, Just Neighbors, Legal Aid Justice Center, Sin Barreras, Virginia Interfaith Center for Public Policy, Virginia Coalition for Immigrant Rights, and the Virginia Coalition of Latino Organizations, which I proudly represent here today. And our goals are the following. Our goal is, we have 5 goals. And the first one is to educate and motivate diverse stakeholders in addressing the multiple needs and issues impacting immigrant communities in Virginia. The second is to identify concrete rallying points around which advocates and stakeholders can mobilize themselves to take immediate action. The third is to identify and understand the many challenges facing Virginia as a result of the state's changing demographics and develop positive means to address those challenges and promote community reconciliation, to create a forum for advocates and stakeholders to plan and develop action steps to address specific concerns of the immigrant communities they serve, and finally, to create a safe place where advocates and stakeholders can form supportive networks that actively advocate for communities, immigrant communities, and their families. And I also want to take an opportunity right now, and I am going to thank Janet Limon Amado because she is going to be translating. And I think I also see that we have Felix with us translating as well. So please speak slowly. And again, if somebody is just joining us, make sure to please silence your phones. And as of now, I am going to tell you that we have a great program for all of you. And as I said, we have 3 topics and 3 panel discussions that we are going to have today. And after each panel discussion, we will have a 10-minute break where you can go take a cup of coffee, get a glass of water, and come back to join us. The first topic is the Virginia legislative update from the 2021 General Assembly and upcoming 2022 General Assembly and post-2021 Virginia state elections. So it's a great, great topic. Then the second topic is the implementation of Virginia's new driver privilege cards and the law. And the third and final topic for today will be discussing racial inequities in U.S. immigration law. And with that, let me now introduce the first panel, and it is with me. I have my great friend and the executive director of the Virginia Coalition of Latino Organizations, Edgar Aranda Yanok. Edgar currently works with the Legal Aid Justice Center's Immigrant Advocacy Program as the senior lead organizer. He is also the executive director of the Virginia Coalition of Latino Organizations, VACOLAO. In 2014, he received a national award from Tides Foundation in recognition for his extraordinary service and dedication to driving thoughtful reform in education. In 2011, he received a practitioner fellowship from the Kalmonowitz Initiative for Labor and the Working Poor at Georgetown University. Prior to his work to the United States, he was a practicing lawyer in Peru. Mr. Aranda has received recognition and support for his leadership in serving immigrant communities through the Fellowship Awards, a Partnership for Equity grant issued by the Community Foundation in the National Capital Region, the Professor Samuel Guindorf Award from Temple University, and James E. Bailey School of Law in the 2010 Lion West Leadership Award of the Community Foundation of the Greater Capital Region. Edgar, thank you for being here, and he will be our moderator for our first panel.
Thank you. Thank you, Beatriz. Thank you, everybody, for joining us at this important summit. So today, I am going to moderate the panel, the Virginia Legislative Update from 2021, Virginia General Assembly, and the upcoming 2022. So this is very important panel. For this discussion, we invited 5 outstanding panelists. So Suk Jong Oh from the Virginia, she's the director of the Virginia, the NACASEC of the Virginia office, where she leads organizing and advocacy work. She used to work also in the American Federation of the State, County, and Municipality Employees. Also, we will have Simon Sandoval Motimber. He is one of the best lawyers in Virginia, I would say, in the United States. He is the director of the Immigrant Advocacy Program of the Legal Aid Justice Center. In 2016, he was awarded the Legal Aid Lawyer of the Year from the Virginia State Bar for his work setting up a statewide legal representation program for Central American child refugees. In 2017, he won the Win Newman Equality Award from American for Democratic Action for his work challenging the Muslim ban. He has been instrumental in bringing litigation and passing legislation challenging some of the worst abuses of the immigration system under Democratic and Republican presidents and governors alike. Simon is graduate of Yale Law School and Columbia University and was the Wassertein Public Interest Fellow at Harvard Law School this fall. So outstanding. And Freddy Mejia, he is the healthcare policy analyst with the Commonwealth Institute. He is passionate about working with low, moderate income, so specifically passionate about healthcare inequalities during the internship with Mason and Partners Free Clinic in Northern Virginia. He is graduate of the Virginia Commonwealth University and George Mason University with degrees in social work. And Kim Bobo, well, everybody knows Kim Bobo. She's the executive director of the Virginia Interfaith Center for Public Policy. Kim is a national promoter of social justice who literally wrote the book on faith-based organizing. So she began working with the Virginia Interfaith on February 2010. So thank you, Kim, for joining us. And also with us is Janet Limon Amado. She's the Virginia Program Manager for the National Domestic Worker Alliance in Caring Action, where she fights for immigrant and labor rights. As a senior at the Virginia Commonwealth University, Janet founded Undocumented, a student organization advocating for undocumented students. And also she's helping us today with the Virginia or the National Domestic Alliance with interpretation. Thank you, Janet. So let's begin. I'm not sure if our colleague Suk Young joined the meeting. We were exchanging some messages, but so Suk Young, are you there? I'm not sure if you already joined the event. So it seems that she's still not here with us. So Then we are going, so she will discuss about the financial aid. That was a huge victory for our community. So financial aid for undocumented students or immigrant students, regardless of their legal status. So that was a big victory that was announced also for the governor in the video that we showed at the beginning. Well, we can then wait. So now I will welcome Simon Sandoval Motimber so that we can talk about one of the big issues also, the privacy for driver privilege card for those who will benefit from the driver privilege card. So that's the privacy element, which is a huge protection. Since we are going to have a new administration, we don't know how they will operate, but we have a law in place that is taking care of the privacy of the beneficiaries of the driver pledge card. So Simon Sandoval, please go ahead.
Hey folks, can you all hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. Okay, so as you'll recall, so we do have the entire next hour is going to be really digging into issues around driver privilege cards. So I don't want to get too much into the weeds. I'll be pretty top level. In 2020, after a full decade of fighting, we finally won one of the biggest demands of this community, which is driver privilege cards for Virginians, regardless of immigration status. There was a little bit of privacy protections baked into the bill, the original bill that created driver privilege cards as a thing. And then there was also a separate privacy bill that Delegate Ayala sponsored that also passed. And the privacy protections there were mostly about preventing law enforcement from doing sort of batch downloads and batch use of facial recognition technology to do sort of like large scale, big data type processing. But we understood, and so this was good. This would prevent, the Trump ICE from doing sort of fishing expeditions to try to use DPC data to figure out who might be a foreign national and who might not be a foreign national, who might be a US citizen and who might not be a US citizen. The other thing that the original bill created privacy protections around were the actual identification documents that people use to get their DPC, right? Because when you go to get a DPC, you have to prove that you are who you say you are. And the vast majority of people are going to be doing that with home country documentation, passport, cedula, whatever, right? So that was something, but we realized that wasn't close to enough, because in the, the dozen plus other states that have already had driving privileges for undocumented immigrants for many years prior to Virginia. And also in Virginia, with regards to immigrants who had access to driver's licenses by virtue of a legal status that they then lost. What we know is that far and away, the biggest use that ICE makes of DMV data is not fishing expeditions to try to figure out who might be an immigrant, but rather simply address information for immigrants that are already on their target list for whatever particular reason, right? I mean, a very common fact pattern is that someone is in deportation proceedings, they miss their hearing for whatever reason, they get ordered deported for not showing up for their hearing, and now ICE is looking for them in order to try to pick them up and deport them, right? And so what ICE would do is just pop onto the DMV database, find their up-to-date address, and then go and pick them up. So it was really the question that we most needed to protect was totally unprotected, which was address information. We also knew that there were hundreds and hundreds of entities, from private companies to nonprofits to even lawyers, like public personal injury lawyers, who had use agreements with the Virginia DMV that gave them a login that they could just basically log on to the DMV data site, and for either a very small monthly fee or a very small per search charge, just do that search. And so the big concern was that ICE had one of those user agreements, we'd all seen it. And so ICE was able to just pop on. And as a result of all this, the undocumented community felt tremendous anxiety about getting one of these driver privileges cards because they were worried that they were just handing themselves over to ICE. So Vasir and the Legal Aid Justice Center worked with an organization called Just Futures Law that's really at the cutting edge nationally of privacy concerns around immigration and fighting back against what we call the digital wall. And did a ton of research. And one of the things that we found out that really surprised me, what we learned over the course of 2020 is that ICE had actually let their user agreement with the DMV expire. So ICE didn't even have an active user agreement with the Virginia DMV. And the reason that they'd done that was that they didn't need it because they were getting everything by means of the state police. So the state, I don't need to get too much into the technological details, but basically the state police have a portal into the DMV data, which, anyone who's ever been pulled over or seen a TV show in which someone gets pulled over, that shouldn't be surprising to you. But then the state police gives portals into their own system to tons and tons and tons of law enforcement entities around the country, right? And so that includes the Michigan State Police. So if you get pulled over with your Virginia plates when you're driving in Michigan, the Michigan State Police can sort of, by means of the Virginia State Police, log on and figure out who you are. So that's one thing. But it also includes ICE, right? And the FBI and ATF and tons of other federal law enforcement agencies. So ICE, by just one step removed, had direct access to the Virginia DMV. So we knew that there were two things that we needed to really choke off. First, we needed to choke off the ICE access to the state police portal, right? So this was now more than just a DMV bill. This is actually now a bill that's going to affect state police as well. Second of all, we needed to prevent ICE from essentially just renewing a user agreement directly with the DMV. But then there was this third issue that we learned from the experience in California. In California, advocates managed to do just that. They managed to choke off ICE access to California DMV and to California State Police databases. And then what did ICE do? They just turned around and purchased a subscription to LexisNexis for a relatively small amount of money. And LexisNexis was also providing all the same information. And so really without a hiccup, ICE was able to continue getting the information they needed out of the California DMV by means of LexisNexis. And that's not the only company that, data broker company that does this. But really, essentially, for a small monthly fee, they were able to continue getting all the information that folks in California had thought they were preventing them from getting. So we knew that the third leg of this three-legged stool had to be regulating data brokers. So what started as really just a simple DMV bill turned into a law enforcement bill and turned into the most complex thing of all, which is like a data broker regulation bill. And it turned out actually that that third aspect with regards to data brokers was the one that caused the most kerfluffle within the 2021 General Assembly, precisely because there was so much other stuff going on at the same time about data privacy and regulation of data brokers in general. And so this got sort of caught up in that broader discussion. And in the end, we did manage to pass a law. Delegate Tran was the patron on the House side and did a tremendous amount of amazing work, not just drafting this and submitting it, but really constantly revising and revising and revising to get every single holdout on board, because we knew that the Republicans, and I should preface this by saying, all of the organizations in this panel, we're all nonprofit, nonpartisan 501c3s. When I use the word Democrat and Republican, I'm using those as descriptors, not as sort of, moral judgments or pro-con. But we knew that the Republican side was likely to be in lockstep against this. And so we couldn't afford to lose any Democratic votes in the Senate, and we couldn't afford to lose very many Democratic votes in the House. And in the end, it did turn out to be the data broker regulation that was the most controversial on the Democratic side. There was really no controversy whatsoever on the Democratic side about the notion that we should stop ICE from getting access to DMV data. And I want to point out that this was after the Biden inauguration, right? So the concern that many folks had that, protecting immigrants against ICE would cease to be a mainstream Democratic platform after the Biden inauguration. Maybe it was still Trump hangover, or maybe it's going to persist on into the future. I sure hope it's the latter. But we didn't have to do a lot of work to explain to the Democratic side why it was necessary to protect immigrants' personal information from ICE. That was sort of a quick, that's right. And really, it was just the data broker thing that proved controversial. In the end, we did take a lot of the enforcement mechanisms out of the data broker restrictions. So there are restrictions on data brokers, but with pretty minimal auditing and enforcement provisions. But the provisions preventing ICE from getting direct access to DMV data or indirect access by means of the state police were pretty much unchanged from the original draft of the bill. Now, of course, I'm using shorthand when I say preventing ICE. ICE can always, just like any law enforcement agency, can always go and get a warrant from a federal judge. They can get a court order to get whatever they want. In point of fact, they rarely do that, right? It's just not agency culture to do that. It's not a thing that they're used to doing. And the other sort of complicated thing about ICE is that they do engage in sort of two different types of enforcement. They engage in regular old civil immigration enforcement, but they also enforce certain federal criminal statutes around child pornography, around, sex trafficking, et cetera, right? And Delegate Tran realized early on that if we did anything that purport to prevent ICE from enforcing, federal child pornography laws, that would be a non-starter, even with the Democratic caucus in the Senate. So there is a carve out for ICE when they're engaged in federal criminal law enforcement. But generally speaking, with regards to civil immigration enforcement, the protections are fairly strong. And so what prior to July 1st, which was the effective date of the bill, what was previously a really fraught decision for certain immigrants, whether to get one of these cards or not. Now, of course, nothing in these United States is perfectly safe for undocumented immigrants, but at the very least, they can be more reassured that the only way ICE is going to be able to get their address information is by jumping through significant hoops, or, quite frankly, lying to the DMV about why they're using it. They're not going to be able to get it just by virtue of some ICE officer sort of on his own, sitting down at his computer, typing in a few keystrokes, and all of a sudden getting your address. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of questions about that, but I don't want to spend too much time on it because, like I said, the whole next hour is going to be about DPCs. I do want to mention the identification privilege cards, which was Delegate Guzman's bill, sort of a walker's permit for DPCs. What we found with DPC implementation was that there's a lot of undocumented immigrants, especially in Northern Virginia, but throughout the state, who actually have no interest in operating a motor vehicle, but they really do want to get an identification card issued by the Commonwealth of Virginia. And so Delegate Guzman put in a bill. The effective date will be January 1st of 2022, that will allow immigrants, regardless of immigration status, to get what's called an identification privilege card. I want to note that the vote was 59-41 in the House, which meant that it did pick up 3 or 4 Republican votes. So it was slightly that's about as bipartisan as you get for anything benefiting the immigrant community. It was a party line vote in the Senate. It's going to be a $25 fee. It's valid for 4 years. The same onerous restrictions about proving that you've been paying Virginia state taxes are present. But significantly, it didn't require a budget amendment since the $25 fee was deemed significant to pay for itself. So the implementation of the identification privilege card can't be sort of pocket vetoed by the next governor by simply failing to fund it in the budget. So that's sort of what there is to say about DPC privacy. I do want to talk a little bit during this panel about another topic, which is jail to deportation pipeline and anti-sanctuary cities and sort of threats that we see in the coming year. But I think I'll let the other panelists go first, and then we can talk a little bit about that towards the end.
Thank you, Simon. Yeah, so we will have a Q&A segment so that we can talk more about. But first, so the interpreters have a message for everybody. So the interpreters, could you please go ahead? I'm not sure if they can hear me, so okay, go ahead.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, this is Aldo Resendiz, pronounced they, them. I'm interpreting along with my colleague Felix. We just want to remind folks to please speak slowly, loudly, and clearly into your microphones to make interpretation easier. Also, we kindly ask folks not to use acronyms, and if you use an acronym, please tell us what it stands for so that we can accurately interpret into Spanish. I also just want to make sure that people know how to access interpretation. So if you're joining through Zoom on your computer, you should see a globe icon at the bottom of your screen. To listen to interpretation, click on the globe and select your language of choice. If you're joining through your smartphone, you will see 3 dots at the bottom right. Click there, select language interpretation, and then select your language of choice and press done. If you have any problems doing so, please comment in the chat box and someone from the staff should be able to help you. Now I'll make the same announcement in Spanish. Buenos días, mi nombre es Aldo Resendiz, mis pronombres son ella, le, y junto con mi colega Félix vamos a proveer interpretación para este congreso. Les pedimos por favor a todos los participantes que por favor hablen lentamente y en voz alta y clara en sus micrófonos para facilitar la interpretación. También les pedimos que si usan alguna sigla o acrónimo, por favor nos digan qué es lo que significa para que podamos interpretarlo adecuadamente en el otro idioma. También les queremos recordar que hay interpretación, obviamente, entonces si no saben cómo acceder, le van a dar clic en la parte inferior de su pantalla. Si se conectan a través de la computadora, van a ver el icono de un globo terráqueo, le van a dar clic allí y van a seleccionar su idioma de preferencia. Si se conectan desde su teléfono inteligente, van a ver 3 puntitos en la parte inferior a mano derecha, le van a dar clic allí. Van a seleccionar su idioma de preferencia y van a seleccionar interpretación de idiomas, después su idioma de preferencia y después finalizar. Si tienen alguna pregunta o no se pueden conectar, por favor escriban en el chat para que a alguno de los organizadores les pueda ayudar. Gracias. Thank you.
Bien, thank you very much. Now with these instructions, so I hope everybody is able to hear everything what is said in this summit. Now I would like to welcome Suk-Yeon. Suk-Yeon, so thank you for joining. We didn't know, but the capacity of the summit of this Zoom was only 100, so we will be reinitiating this at 10:40 with a new link. but we will be sending to you before that. So right now, Suk-Young, please go ahead. I read your bio earlier, so everybody knows what you are doing. So thank you, Suk-Young. She will be talking about the financial aid. Go ahead, Suk-Young.
Hi, how exciting that there are, there's so much interest in Virginia to talk about important issues and policies that impact immigrant communities, right, in Virginia. That's really, really exciting. So I've got about 10 to 12 minutes to say a few words about tuition equity in Virginia. And I can see from the faces on the screen and names of people as I scroll through the participant list that, everyone, there are many people here who made tuition equity possible in Virginia. So before I begin, I just want to say thank you and congratulations, right, to all of us exercising collective vision and leadership to make tuition equity real in Virginia. I wish I could say that we were the first state in the South to do to implement some form of tuition equity, but we're pretty close. Okay. So when we talk about tuition equity when it comes to undocumented youth, we are there's basically like two separate policies that make up tuition equity. So the first one, which was made possible in the 2020 General Assembly session, was extending in-state tuition rates to undocumented students. This is really important because it set the definition that we then use to build on for the 2021 session that happened earlier this year, that to expand state financial assistance programs to undocumented students. So, in-state tuition, as I'm sure you all know, this became effective July 1st, 2020. Students can establish domicile in Virginia regardless of immigration status. There are some exceptions for international students on student visas or other temporary visas. But other than those exceptions, if a student can show all of the following: that they attended a Virginia high school for at least 2 years, that the student graduated from either a public school, a private school, or homeschool from a Virginia high school, or got a Virginia GED on or after July 1st, 2008, that the student or at least one parent guardian has filed Virginia income taxes for the last 2 years, and the student is enrolling in a public college or university in Virginia. So by opening up the universe of students who can establish domicile in Virginia to that category, that then lays the groundwork. That then lays the groundwork for expanding state financial assistance. So with state financial aid assistance, currently it is still not yet implemented. The implementation date for being able to apply for state financial aid will be August 1st, 2022. So we're not, so if there are any students or people who work with students and young people, it's not yet effective, right? It will be effective August 1st, 2022. And the financial assistance programs that are open to, again, those students that I named earlier are the financial assistance programs that are administered by SHEV, or the State Council of Higher Education in Virginia. That means it's specifically open to state administered financial aid programs. This does not include, popular federal assistance programs, right? Including like federal work study. This is only applicable to state administered financial assistance programs. It again is because it shares the same eligibility criteria for in-state tuition. It counts only for students who are enrolled or will be enrolling in public colleges and universities. So there are, still, right, like programs out there scholarship programs that are open to, any college or university, right? Like a private college or university like Marymount. But this particular state financial aid extension is only for the public colleges and universities. I'm not quite sure how much more to share at this point. I don't know if people have like specific questions that they'd like to put in the chat or whatnot. And later on, I can share a little bit about what we think how we're thinking about tuition equity, given that we now have a new administration and political composition in Virginia state government. Thank you.
Thank you, Suk-Yeon. Yeah, we'll be at the Q&A very quick. So first, Freddy Mejia. So Freddy Mejia, he will be talking about, so there is new benefits, they also become law. So Freddy, welcome, and please go ahead.
Hey, good morning, and thank you, Edgar. Hopefully everyone can hear me. If you can't, just flag me. Great. All right, so today, in the short time I have with you, I want to talk about 3 policies. There's 2 that are currently in place, which is the prenatal coverage for undocumented immigrants, and Governor Northam mentioned that in his statement. And also wanted to mention the elimination of the 40-quarter rule. So this is a rule that went into effect April of this year, so it might be new to some. Well, and first off, I just kind of want to share some quick data because I am a big data nerd. Why is this so important? Why are we looking for access for coverage for immigrants? So in Virginia, out of all the uninsured people, 1 in 4 is a non-citizen. So that's a huge portion of the uninsured community that are immigrants. And we also know that there's a lot of barriers for immigrants to access coverage through Medicaid, through Medicare, or through the Affordable Care Act, depending on your status, right? So I just want to lay the groundwork. And I think this group understands the need and the urgency for coverage, but I just wanted to make sure that we're all on the same page. So the first policy that I want to dig into is the prenatal coverage for undocumented people, and that is known as FAMOUS prenatal. So actually, I'm going to go ahead and share a flyer in the chat. It is in English and in Spanish. So this was a change that was made in the last legislative session in 2021. And it was effective starting July 1st of this year. And before this policy was in effect, undocumented immigrant women who were expecting had only access to local hospital care and also emergency Medicaid, which just covered the birth of the child. But this is comprehensive coverage. So if someone is pregnant and low income, then they would be offered comprehensive health coverage. That includes dental, that includes labor and delivery services, and just routine checkups. The coverage ends 60 days after the end of pregnancy. While that is not perfect, it is certainly a big change here in Virginia. I talked to DMAS recently, and the latest numbers that they gave me was that 2,800 women have received coverage through this program since July, which is a big deal. And also, when folks have coverage as they're having their children, the children are more likely to have health coverage as well. So we're hopeful that more children are receiving health coverage, comprehensive health coverage from day one. So I know that this change was made in the budget, right? This was included as a budget amendment. So this could technically go away pretty fast if the executive branch decides that they want to go a different route, right? This would not need a bill to be changed. This could happen through a budget amendment, and then the negotiations usually happen behind closed doors with that type of budget amendment. There's no committee hearings and things of that nature. But one thing that I'm hopeful for this program in particular is that it actually saves Virginia money. So having this program saves Virginia about $2 million a year. So I'm hopeful that regardless of the interests of any incoming legislators, that this program will stay in place. The next policy I want to share was the 40-quarter rule. So starting April 1st, legally residing adults no longer needed to prove 10 years of work history in order to be eligible for Medicaid. So the federal guidelines say, legally residing adults have to wait 5 years to apply for Medicaid. The rules are different, right, for refugees and pregnant women and children, but specifically for legally residing adults, the federal government says you have to wait 5 years. Well, Virginia had a law that said, on top of the 5 years, you need to show me that you worked in the United States for 10 years. Obviously, that's a big barrier. Often folks can't prove that, don't have the paperwork. Who keeps anything for 10 years, right? So thankfully, that rule was ended through the budget process. So as I mentioned, though, the budget is a little bit easier to change than bills and things that are in Virginia code. And this policy actually costs the state a bit of money. Now, I'm hopeful that the outcomes and the fact that giving people health coverage is a good thing will keep this policy in place. But it is something that I'm keeping my eye on in case there are efforts to reduce or put this back in place, because it is a little bit easier in some ways to do away with. But so I did want to flag that. The last policy I want to talk about is something that us at TCI are really excited about, and it's a proactive policy. So 10 states and DC have a program that is completely state funded that provides health coverage to undocumented children. So we would love to see Virginia join the ranks. It would be the first state in the South to do so. And just to put a little bit of understanding of what the need looks like, here in Virginia, 5% of all Virginia children are uninsured. When you're looking at non-citizen children, the uninsured rate is 31.3%. So that's 6 times more likely to be uninsured if you're a non-citizen child rather. So that's really concerning, right? Thankfully, we had a budget amendment last year during the legislative session led by Delegate Krizik and Senator McClellan to bring together a work group to look at this issue and to come up with solutions and provide policy recommendations. That report is scheduled to be released December 1st, from my understanding. But it would provide a pathway and a setup for us to kind of introduce legislation. While we expect to see that legislation moving forward this session, I think the measurement of success might be a little bit different, right? But it's important that for us that we're going to put this forth and keep working on this as a possible multi-year strategy. I'm sure I don't have to tell you, many people here, that Medicaid expansion didn't happen in 1 day, 1 year. But we're hopeful that we won't have to wait as long to provide a really awesome program and health coverage for up to 13,000 children in Virginia. That's the estimate that the work group came up with. So I'm happy to answer any questions on that. But I think that's all I had in my short time with you all.
Thank you, Freddie. Now let's welcome Kim Bobo. Kim, go ahead, please, with all the victories that happened during the General Assembly 2021. So what we are expecting this year. Go ahead.
Okay. So I was going to talk a little bit about the prenatal healthcare because we did a lot of work on that one, but Freddie did that, so that was great. It will eventually probably cover about 7,000 women. So again, it's a pretty big thing, and the fact that 2,800 have signed up already is really a testament to, one, how important it is, but also what a good job on outreach that the agency has done. The one that we have lost again on is trying to get farm workers covered by the minimum wage. Again, we got a bill through the House and couldn't get it out of the Senate Commerce and Labor Committee. And again, the two most important senators, Deeds and Lewis, have not changed their minds. We just met with Senator Deeds yesterday, and despite a really good meeting with him, again, he's in the same place. So again, we will continue pushing on it. It's not all immigrants, but it's mostly immigrants in Virginia. We'll continue pushing on it because it's the right thing to do, but I would be shocked if we could get something through in the coming year. A couple other things, though, that I think are important that passed this year. We did get paid sick days for 30,000 home care workers. Again, not just immigrants, like lots of people of color are home care workers. But it's a recognition that people actually do need paid sick days. Again, we're going to keep pushing this coming year on paid sick days. It will be a little hard. I think had the Dems kept control of the House, we would have had a very good shot at it this year. But I think it will be difficult this year. We'd also worked with the Legal Aid Justice Center on trying to get a bill to require the Virginia Safety and Health Codes Board to issue a standard on heat stress. So many immigrant workers work in landscaping and construction and other sectors, again, that are outdoors and experience a lot of heat stress. And so we were hoping to get some sort of heat stress bill to require them. The Safety and Health Codes Board said, oh no, we'll go ahead and do it. We don't need the bill. So the patron said, okay, fine, we won't do the bill. And in fact, they have moved forward in trying to create a heat stress standard. It's currently, they've had a whole set of hearings on it, and it's currently in sort of the drafting stage on this. Now, again, I'm a little concerned about what's going to happen because we, as Virginia, had passed the strongest COVID-19 OSHA standard in the country. And then right before one of the board meetings in the summer, the governor basically reappointed and appointed a lot of folks to the board that completely changed the composition. And then they basically undermined and cut back a lot of the really core parts of the COVID standard. So now we have a board, Safety and Health Codes Board, that's going to be deciding this heat stress standard that frankly isn't nearly as good of a board as we had a year ago. So again, I feel like we've kind of gone a little bit backwards on that. And then, of course, there were a number of things that happened that weren't directly related to immigrants, but again, are indirectly affect what happens to immigrants in Virginia. So abolition of the death penalty, which again filters down in terms of how you negotiate on crimes. All the marijuana laws, which we didn't work on, but are out there. Bunch of rent reform things. So again, there's other things that I think that occurred this last session. Now, during the special session where they were dealing with all of this federal money that came down, my assessment is essentially most of the money went to big infrastructure projects that Virginia had wanted to do long term, and very little of the money went to anything connected to low-income people, and very little to immigrants. Again, you can look at this thing or that thing in terms of small dollars, but overall the investment went to things that companies wanted, that businesses wanted, and very little went to things that were a priority for immigrants and low-income people in Virginia. Now, going forward in 2022, like none of us quite know what's going to happen, right? We have a governor who has said taxes are a big deal for him. He's proposing to remove the food tax. That might be a policy some of us could support. Again, it's not gonna, the governor-elect said, it's gonna help people by $1,500. That's not really true. It's probably less than $200, but it's a regressive tax. So again, that might be something we could support. The governor is going to make school stuff a priority, charter school expansion, probably some symbolic stuff on CRT, which doesn't really exist, critical race theory. And again, he will likely change leadership in some of the agencies that we care about. And that could, who knows what that'll be. The House of Delegates is going to be controlled by the Republicans. The Speaker will, appoint all members of committees, all chairs, all vice chairs, and the proportionment on the committees will be based in the House is really based on sort of the total numbers. So the numbers won't be that difficult, except for Rules Committee, where the Speaker gets to appoint everybody. It was 13-5 under the Democrats. Last time the Republicans were in charge, it was 11-4. And that's the rules. That's how they operate. And again, that committee has always, under both Democrats and Republicans, has operated in a pretty partisan way. So I think we can expect to see that going forward. Again, the leadership, the Republican leadership has talked about, they want to support more police in schools. So the reforms that have happened over the last couple of years to get the police out of schools, I think we're going to see some real efforts to roll that back. I would not be surprised if there was an attempt to roll back the minimum wage increase and delay some of the implementation on that. There's clearly going to be fights over taxes. And so again, I think that's what we're going to see in the House. In the Senate, even the Dems are talking about that they're going to be a blue wall, right? They're going to stop things. They're going to whatever. Again, it's interesting because we've always thought, in the last few years, the Senate, particularly Commerce and Labor Committee, has been the big problem for us. So it'll be interesting to see how they're going to operate. And of course, the big thing out there for all of us is, is there going to be another election next year? And, who knows on what's going on. I don't know anything more than what I read in the newspapers on this. So for us, the priorities, we're going to keep fighting on paid sick days, keep fighting on farm workers. We will keep working on the heat stress, probably will support the food tax removal. And then we're going to continue expanding. We've been working this last year on putting together a wage theft website in both English and Spanish that connect workers who haven't gotten paid with attorneys who can help them with their cases. Again, this is a follow-up on sort of the 6 or 8 bills that we've passed over the last few years on wage theft and trying to implement some of this and make sure that people can recover their wages. So I'm done. Thanks.
Thank you, Kim. Now, so let's welcome Janet Amado. Janet Limon Amado from the Domestic Workers Alliance. So thank you, Janet. Go ahead. I'm not sure if Janet is here. Yeah, there was some issues that we have, just I can mention now, the capacity of our summit. We have many registrants, but unfortunately the capacity is only 100. So we are using another device. So Janet, are you there, or we cannot hear you if you're there? Okay, so now let's open for discussion. I am sure many people have. Go ahead.
Sorry, Edgar, before we go to Q&A, I want to bring up another topic, which is more of a forward-looking topic because there wasn't really any movement on it in 2021. With regards to jail to deportation pipeline and attacks on local ordinances that seek to protect immigrants from ICE enforcement. So every single year up to and including 2019, several House Republicans put forward an anti-sanctuary cities bill, which reads in total, no locality shall adopt any ordinance, procedure, or policy intended to restrict the enforcement of federal immigration laws. In 2019, actually, it was Senator Black, who's no longer there, was the lead patron of it. But this bill passed both houses of the legislature every single year through and including 2019, and had to be vetoed by the governor every single year, right? First Governor McAuliffe, then Governor Northam. Delegate Poindexter was the lead person on the House side, also not there anymore. Delegate Mark Cole was also one of the lead people, also not there anymore. But Dave LaRock was also, Delegate LaRock was also a big supporter of these bills, and he is still there. And several of the folks who replaced, for example, the individual who replaced Delegate Poindexter is arguably even more conservative than Delegate Poindexter was. And so there's every reason to expect that these bills will come back because all they need to do is hit copy paste, right? Or replace 2019 with 2022. And we don't have the backdrop of a governor necessarily willing to veto these bills. In the past, one of the talking points that some folks on our side used to oppose these bills was, well, there are no sanctuary cities in Virginia, so this is really just a messaging bill, and the message it sends is a bad message. I don't personally think that was a good message even back then, but it is now clearly and unmistakably not true, right? There are policies by several counties, first and foremost Fairfax County, that are, quote, intended to restrict the enforcement of federal immigration laws. And so it would be of devastating impact if a bill of this nature were to be signed into law this year. So my personal opinion is that this is going to be the lead anti-immigrant attack in 2022 that our side is really going to have to unite and fight back against. Even if you live in a jurisdiction that doesn't currently have any policies of that nature, it is still of huge importance to fight back against these bills. A similar bill is a mandatory ICE notification bill that would require all jails and prisons and whatever to notify ICE whenever anyone is released from that jail, regardless of the reason they were in there in the first place. I mean, even if they were in there just for a drunken public, put in the drunk tank for a night to sober up, in which case under state law, that book in is now no longer required to be reported to ICE. After a 2020 amendment, only felony book ins are required to be reported to ICE. The book out under the, for example, Poindexter's bill in 2019, the book out would have to be reported to ICE under all circumstances. So I think these jail to deportation issues, which our side really hasn't engaged in that much, as I said, there were no relevant bills really in 2021. In 2020, we did have one bill, but it didn't garner a lot of attention, neither from our side nor the other side. I think these are going to be a big deal in 2022, and we're really going to have to work on it. My hope is that DPC is not. I hope that we don't have to spend a lot of effort defending the existence of the DPC program, because in the nearly year since the program has been in existence, it hasn't really been under attack. I mean, I wasn't following every single House of Delegates, all 100 House of Delegates races in the Commonwealth of Virginia, but I didn't see any Republican attacks, any Republican candidates, bringing big attacks on DPCs and saying, oh, it's terrible. These, whatever's are getting licenses now. We need to stop, put an end to that. And I also have to say that the Youngkin campaign was really the first statewide Republican campaign in the better part of a decade that did not run explicitly on anti-immigrant fear-mongering, MS-13, whatever. Like just compare it to the governor's race 4 years ago, where the candidate whom Northam beat, his ads were just all MS-13 all the time, right? So there is some hope that maybe things in 2022 on certain issues, we won't have to do as aggressive of defense as, we might fear. But, then again, with, 52 Republican legislators in the House side, all it takes is for one to put in a bill repealing DPCs, and then we have to, we have work to do, right, in terms of going on the defense.
I'll also just weigh in now about like tuition equity and the new administration, since the other speakers have shared a little bit about, some thoughts about how all of this amazing work we've done together as a, has, what the prospects are in the next administration. So, as you may recall, as Freddie talked about those two health policies, right? Well, those were policies that were implemented through the budget, right? Whereas the bills like policies now, like driver's privilege cards, extending in-state tuition rates, expanding state financial assistance programs, those are actually done through legislation, literally like the state code is now different. It incorporates those policies. So the reason why I bring this up is that given, if, as Simon says, it only takes one delegate or one senator to be like, I don't like this anymore, right? And try to reverse it. Well, for a budget, so a policy or program that passes through budget, it will be easier in some ways to try to reverse it, especially if Governor-elect Youngkin and others are really gung-ho about the tax cuts, right? Because in Virginia, like every state, if the state budget has to be balanced. So if it's like, I want to cut taxes, right? Then that means the state will get less revenue. If the state is getting less revenue, that means the state has that much less money to spend on. So that means Youngkin and others are going to have to look in the state budget for things to cut. Like, what are we not going to then spend our money on? so that it pays for potential tax cuts, right? So when it comes to the tuition equity pieces, there is not as just this is again just very initial thinking. There's like just some conversation that a couple of us have had is that the extending of in-state tuition rates. It's been around now for a year. Colleges and universities have not, and neither has the State Council of Higher Education in Virginia, like put like a fiscal impact on it. It hasn't said like, oh, because we did this, it cost us like, I don't know, $1 million or something. So consequently, if you're an anti-immigrant and you're trying to like pay for tax cuts, you're not necessarily going to go after extending in-state tuition. However, there is some chance, though, that someone could go after expanding the state financial assistance programs. And we say this because, we're still waiting for the governor's budget to come out. But this year, SHEV, that State Council of Higher Education in Virginia, did request some money to implement this piece of legislation. Like they asked for money for staffing, and then they also asked for money to like set up the system, since undocumented students don't file FAFSAs, or the form that students normally file to that colleges and universities use to determine the amount of financial aid. So in some ways, Virginia actually has to set up like a parallel system to assess financial need. So given all of that, if somebody really wanted to, and they're like going through the budget and they're like, okay, we need to raise X amount of money to pay for tax cuts, how are we going to do it? They could potentially pick this one, but it will be harder to reverse because it is legislation, meaning someone is going to actually, some delegate or senator is going to have to introduce it as legislation. The hope is, and the intention, and we're definitely going to be monitoring this, is like, as Kim said earlier, the Virginia Senate, which is marginally controlled by Democrats, have said, we're going to be a blue wall. We're going to, try to make sure that like stuff that's already passed doesn't get reversed. So, and we know that we have very strong Senate champions for tuition equity. Which makes it less likely that it would be reversed.
Thank you, Sukyon. And also I see Diane Alejandro. You have your hand raised, so go ahead, Diane.
Hi, I wanted to follow up on Simon's point about the anti-sanctuary bills. I agree wholeheartedly that that is a huge risk. Just to point out that Fairfax maintains to this day that it is not a sanctuary jurisdiction. They do not restrict ICE enforcement in any way. And I know this is wordsmithing, but I think if you ask them, they would say there is nothing in the trust policy that we passed which restricts ICE from doing anything. What they are restricting is the county and the county employees for doing something. Now, I'm not saying that that's going to carry the day, but in terms of what is sanctuary and so forth, hopefully that's something that we can build on. It is absolutely about what the county employees do. Now, things like giving notice to ICE are killers. I mean, absolute killers. And we're making progress finally with the sheriff in Fairfax, but you know, if there's a change in state law, then that all goes out the window. So I do hope that folks, you know, are aware of this and help work to prevent changes. Thanks.
Right. I mean, the problem is, though, of course, that Fairfax doesn't get to decide whether their policies are or are not outlawed by this, you know, hypothetical new law. If it passes, the person who does get to decide is Jason Miyares, the incoming Attorney General. And of the three individuals who won statewide office last week, he's the one with the longest and strongest anti-immigrant track record, and the longest and strongest sort of pro-deporting immigrants who have criminal justice contact with the criminal justice system background, right? So, you know, there would be arguments that are defensible in court, but you know, it's faced with the Virginia Attorney General telling Fairfax County, your policies are now unlawful by virtue of state law, you know, how much of a backbone would Fairfax have to actually take it all the way up to the Virginia Supreme Court to defend their policies is sadly very much TBD. I mean, since I mentioned the incoming Attorney General, one other thing we have to consider is the possibility that he may seek to make a national name for himself by bringing litigation or joining litigation or helping lead litigation against the Biden administration for doing things that are meant to, you know, help immigrants, right? I mean, so far it's been Texas versus United States, right, over and over again. If it becomes Virginia versus United States, right, if the Biden administration is being sued in our name because the Biden administration is trying to do something that is less bad for immigrants than the previous administration did, and they're being sued by the Commonwealth of Virginia, how is our advocacy community going to react to that? That's not necessarily a state policy question, but it is certainly you know, a question that our state is going to have to really sort of, and our community is going to have to really deal with.
Okay, thank you, Simon. So now we have Janet Limon Amado. So Janet, could you please go ahead? So we fixed now the capacity of our Zoom. So now everybody can join. If you know, please, your colleagues who were trying to join, just tell them that they can join now. So Janet Amado, please go ahead. Well, she was there, but if she's not able to join, hey, Janet, yeah, I see you're there, but so if you have questions, please go ahead with your questions. This part is very important so that you can, if you have concerns, we have a new administration, so any other bill that you are thinking, so how it's going to move in this General Assembly, please go ahead with your questions or your comments. So Erika, if you want to read your question for everybody, go ahead. Yeah, so
yes,
so Erika,
sorry, I was muted, sorry.
Okay, go ahead, Erika.
Well, my question is more about this issue is, has any immigration law has passed that offer some amount of okay, hold on. If a judge had deported deportation order to an immigrant back in 2012, but was not enforced, so the immigrant was never deported, that immigrant has a chance to revert that deportation order, or it will last until another judge? I mean, it was back on 2012. So my question is, now that it's 2021, is that deportation order expire, or how will that be approached?
So let me answer that. That would be a question of federal law, and tomorrow
Yes.
morning's 9 a.m. panel is going to be all about federal law. This panel is specifically about state law. The state doesn't have the power to decide who is undocumented and who is documented, who gets deported and who doesn't get deported. The state very much does have the power to decide, okay, so you're undocumented, what next, right? Like, what's your life going to be like as an undocumented person, right? So when you're thinking about like, what things can we bring to the state, versus what things can we bring to the federal government? It's really about like, you know, more about like what your life is going to be like as an undocumented person versus whether you can get a green card.
Okay, yes, okay. So tomorrow? It's tomorrow, another panel, right? Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Erika, for your question. And also I see Ninfa Amador Hernandez. Go ahead, Ninfa, with your question.
Good morning, Edgar. Thank you. As you said, my name is Ninfa Amador, and I am an undocumented student in a college down here in Southwest Virginia. So I have two questions actually on tuition equity. I know Sukyung mentioned that these financial aid assistance will only be for public schools, but I know there's a Virginia tuition assistance grant, the VTAG, and if I understand it correctly, I think this students at private colleges are also eligible for the VTAG. So would undocumented students at private colleges be eligible for this VTAG? That's my first question. Sorry, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, Ninfa. So that's a good question. I do not want to speak incorrectly. So if anyone else knows that question about VTAG, that would be really helpful. At this point, Chev, the State Council of Higher Education in Virginia, has not issued any like frequently asked questions or like fact sheets about state financial assistance programs. So, I mean, my understanding is that if it is a state financial aid program administered by this, and it's administered by the state, again, my understanding is that it's supposed to be for, like, because it follows the eligibility for in-state tuition rates, and the in-state tuition rates expansion only extended to public colleges and universities. So my initial interpretation, and I'm happy, Ninfa, if you'd like to send me, like, put your email address somewhere. I can put my email address in the chat. I'm happy to follow up because I do have actually a call with Chev later this week to get you a more definitive answer to that question. But I don't want to say definitively right now, you know, yes or no to your question. I'd rather say I don't know, and that I will find the information for you.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Maybe one of the other panelists here do know, because again, you know, there were several of us that worked together to make tuition equity possible in Virginia.
Thank you. I am a senior, so this policy wouldn't affect me as much, but I am interested to see how others after me would benefit from it. Thank you.
Okay.
And then the next question I have is on the DPC cards. So Simon mentioned the 2020 law provided more privacy protections for Virginia undocumented drivers. So if does this law say that an undocumented immigrant who was deported recently and came back, should they feel safe if they would like to get a DPC card? Would this law kind of protect them a little bit, or should they just not get one? Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, that's a very, very individualized question, right? And so I would never give blanket advice, but I think that there's sort of three factors that, broadly speaking, are being weighed when an undocumented immigrant decides whether or not to get a DPC card, right? And those three factors are: one, what is their personal level of risk vis-a-vis their immigration status, right? And then two, how much do they actually need it, right? Like, are they actually driving around to work every day in Culpeper County, which is infamous for driving while brown stops? Or is it just something that they'd kind of like to have, but they don't even really have a car and whatever? And then 3 are, how strong are the background privacy protections? So I, described the ways in which we made 3 better, but 1 and 2 are still factors that each individual has to take into account in deciding whether to do this or not.
Sorry, could you repeat the third one? How strong?
The third is just how strong are the background privacy protections under state law. And that is something that we've increased, but it's not a rock solid wall, right? It's never going to be a rock solid wall. We've patched some of the gaping holes, but there's still, permeability. But anyway, yeah, there's lots of different factors that each person needs to take into account.
All right, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you, Ninfa. So still we have time for another questions. If somebody wants to pose a question, but I have a question while we are waiting for the rest. So Simon, what would be the message for the community regarding the privacy? So people are afraid. They are always asking us how it's going to happen now with my information. This is a new administration.
Yeah, I mean, specifically, to what extent does the change in administration, let's say that, worst case scenario, they appoint a DMV commissioner and a chief of the state police or secretary of public safety who are sort of singularly minded in finding the loopholes and weaknesses in the law to, nonetheless be able to turn over immigrants' information to ICE without actually breaking the law and without changing the law. That's a tough, I don't have a pat, one sentence answer to that. It's something that I'm looking at. It's something that we've asked for a meeting with our consultants who helped us draft the law in the first place. And then the corollary to that question is, what can we ask Commissioner Holcomb to do in the next month and change to sort of lock things in as much as possible, and maybe throw away the key, as it were. And that also, I wish I could have come to this with some answers to that, but I'm still sort of looking into it myself.
Thank you, Simon. Maria, do you have a question? Go ahead.
Sí, buenos días. Mi nombre es María Chavalán Sut, soy Maya Cachiquel. Pues yo sigo viviendo aquí en la iglesia metodista, Wesley Memorial. Mi pregunta es, como yo tengo, que nunca me llegó la carta cuando tenía la corte, y entonces me dieron la orden de deportación y persecución, porque es lo que hicieron, y apretarme cada vez a ISAP, hasta que llegó un punto que yo de alguna manera busqué, pues confiando en Dios, llegué a la iglesia aquí, pero pues no estoy sola, somos muchas a nivel nacional y nosotros estamos siempre con ese miedo por haber hecho público el tomar santuario. Pues no nos sentimos seguros, que sabemos que la policía colabora con ICE. ¿Habrá alguna manera que usted me diga si alguna protección para nosotros por haber hecho público nuestros casos? Porque como hicimos público y siempre nosotros tenemos miedo, porque también tenemos esa carta que nos pusieron por haber hecho público, nos pusieron esa multa de muchos miles de dólares queriéndonos cobrar. Yo quisiera saber si hay una protección para nosotros y que no, cuando ya que cambian los que gobiernan, ojalá que no nos agarren, porque como nos conocen más, yo quisiera saber qué opinión o qué piensan, algún consejo para nosotros. Muchas gracias.
Sí, nuevamente, yo diría que la cuestión de qué es lo que ICE va a hacer y no va a hacer es cuestión federal, el cual será el tema de la reunión de mañana a las 9 de la mañana. Lo que el Estado puede decidir es si los policías locales y estatales colaboren con ICE o no colaboren con ICE, si las cárceles estatales entregan la gente a ICE o no entregan la gente a ICE. Pero ¿qué es lo que ICE va a hacer en sí? Es una cuestión es una cuestión de ley federal, el cual será el tema de mañana. Hoy sí estamos hablando de leyes estatales. Edgar acaba de poner en el chat el Zoom para mañana. Edgar just put in the tomorrow's Zoom, tomorrow in the chat the Zoom for tomorrow. But Sue has just raised a great question in the chat. Sue, do you want to come off of mute and ask that question, and then Suk-Young, you can discuss your answer a bit?
I just raised the question that I thought in-state tuition was available before the legislation because of action that Attorney General Herring took.
Yeah, right. But it was only available for undocumented students who have DACA. There are, many undocumented students who do not have DACA, and that is what the 2020 legislation that passed made that universe broader. I hope that answered your question.
Yes, thank you. It makes it all more concerning.
So
Simon's
in order
comment.
to get DACA, among other things, you have to have been in the country prior to the middle of 2007, right?
Right.
The DACA is totally irrelevant for anyone who's come to the country in the past 14 years.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We have only 6 minutes before we go for a break. If there is any other question, please go ahead. So otherwise, I have a question also. So regarding, so Kim, last year was very, it was good a year, so the 2021. So we talk about evictions and many other issues. So how this year you even you will have your advocacy date. Will be January 18th. So how you are seeing now the strategy regarding that? So things are going to change, and I am not sure if you already have the legislative agenda for that. Kim?
Well, we had a legislative agenda on Monday, and on Tuesday, it kind of, well, actually by Wednesday morning, was clear that a lot of the stuff we had planned to work on probably doesn't have a ghost of a chance. And again, I think as others have suggested, I think we're going to be on the defensive on a number of things. Again, as Simon was describing the anti-sanctuary city stuff, I was recalling all the work that we did on this stuff a few years ago, and the idea of having to be back in that space makes me a little nauseous. But again, I do think, I think what our plan is going to be on several of the key things we're working on, we're just going to run bills anyway. We're going to try and take votes on them, because again, these are the right things to do. But we'll also try to identify, are there some things that the governor and some of the Republicans coming into leadership want that we can support? Again, I do think the eliminating the tax on food, that's a regressive policy. It's one that only 14 states currently have. That feels like a place we could support. And so again, we're gonna try and find some things. And again, we all of us made, when the Republicans were in control, like we all found places where we could find agreement. And so again, I think that's, we're gonna be trying over the next 8 weeks or so to try and figure out, are there some other places where we can work together on things? And then I think we're going to have a set of defensive things, whether it's sanctuary city or I think there'll be a set of things. In terms of our policy, I think the one that we've identified as one of our priorities that we may still have a shot on is trying to put some restrictions on solitary confinement. We've had Republican support on that in the past. Again, we're hoping to have Vogel as a key patron on it, or a co-patron. So again, I think we're going to have to, we'll have to be a little more creative. And we do have a Day for All People, our in-person version lined up. I think it's January 19th. And then we will do a virtual version because so many people loved having the virtual option. We will do virtual from 17th to the 21st, with the 19th being in person. Plus last year we did a College Day of Action that drew an extra 65 people, and we'll do that again on February 2nd. So again, the legislature may change, the leadership may change, but our core values don't really change. And so we've got to continue finding the places we can push forward. And again, we passed Medicaid expansion under Republicans, right? So again, the most important thing in terms of low-income people that Virginia has probably done was under Republicans. So, we got to figure out how we continue to move forward. But it was a bit of surprise for me. And, again, I think there's obviously lots of lessons all of us are going to be coming down to. But one is that, a lot of the things that, we've got to be talking and working with more people in rural areas in Virginia. I think that's clear for all of us. And as you all know, while there are lots of immigrants in Northern Virginia, there's lots of immigrants in, farming communities and, all over the place. So again, finding ways to connect with people will be really important going forward.
Thank you, Kim. Now we're now getting very close to adjourn this panel, but so Janet is with us now. So Janet, please go ahead with the National Domestic Alliance.
Yes, hi, I'm so sorry. As many of y'all know, my name is Limon Amado. I work with the National Domestic Workers Alliance as well as Care in Action.
Real sure when you get that third injection.
Go ahead, Janet.
And so just we're very new here in the space, but basically Care in Action and NDWA was able to pass the 2021 Virginia Domestic Workers Bill of Rights. So allowing domestic workers to have protections in their workforce. So it's very exciting that, domestic workers are going to be able to have some protection when it comes to sexual harassment, protections on their wages, and as well as protections on the safety and safety in their workplace. So those are the three things that basically the domestic Bill of Workers' Rights does. In Care in Action, and NDWA looks forward to really working with everybody here, and hopefully having more collaboration in the future when it comes to the 2022 session. But for us on the 2022 session, we want to make sure that our sexual harassment piece of the Bill of Rights is a little bit more tightening it up. But as y'all know, we don't know how it's going to play out. So hopefully we are going to have to, talk to see creative ways, like Kim said, creative ways to see how we're going to be able to make this happen. But other than that, thank y'all so much.
Thank you, Janet. Thank you. Well, we run out of time, so I want to thank, before I go back to Beatriz, to our presenters, Suk-Jung Oh from NACASEC, Simon Sandoval Motimber from Legal Aid Justice Center, Freddy también the Commonwealth Institute, and also Freddy Mejia from the Commonwealth Institute, Kim Bobo, the Executive Director of the Virginia Interface and for Public Policy, and Janet Limon Amado. So it was great to have you guys. It was wonderful, the conversation. Well, we have a solid base to move for the 2022 General Assembly. So thank you, everybody. With you and now, Beatriz Amberman. Go ahead, Beatriz.
Thank you very much, Edgar, and thank you to all our panelists for this very important discussion regarding the General Assembly, not only an overview of what happened on 2021, but also what can we expect on 2022. And if you just join us, we just ended the first panel discussion, but we invite you to stay with us. We're going to have a 10-minute break. And while we do that, I will just inform you again that the panel discussions coming up is going to be the implementation of Virginia new driver privilege card law, and that is coming up next. And after that, the third and last panel discussion for our evening or our day will be the racial inequities in U.S. immigration law. And as I was looking, you know, people are very, very interested in some of the federal legislation. So we again invite you to join us tomorrow. This is a 2-day summit. And tomorrow we are going to have a discussion and a panel that I'm sure that all of you will be very, very interested in joining. But for now, you have about 10 minutes to go take a break, have a glass of water, grab your cup of coffee, and make sure that you come back with lots of questions. We have a lot of panelists, but one of the things that I want to mention is that it just gives us great comfort to know that in Virginia, there are many organizations that are working together. And that allows me the opportunity to again thank all the organizations that together are supporting this 12th Virginia Immigrant Advocate Summit 2021. And I'm going to mention them again. Meanwhile, you can take a break. But I will again thank the American Civil Liberties Union, People Power Fairfax, Centerville Immigration Forum, Congregation Action Network, Dar al-Jirah or Al-Hiraj Islamic Center, Drive Virginia Forward, Dreamer Mothers in Action, Edu-Futuro, Just Neighbors, Legal Aid Justice Center, Sin Barreras, Virginia Interfaith Center for Public Policy, and the Virginia Coalition for Immigrant Rights, as well as my own organization, and Edgar's, the Virginia Coalition of Latino Organizations. So as you know, there are all these people working together to make sure that we speak on behalf of our communities. So take a break and we'll be back with you in a few minutes. Organizations, and I am your host for today. It is my great pleasure to welcome all of you to our 12th Virginia Immigrant Advocate Summit 2021. And our summit is a 2-day discussion, very important discussion for immigrant rights and many other issues that will affect our community. So this is a forum for you. So thank you for joining us. And as I hear the discussions, I want to mention that coming up today, we will have another panel discussion, which is racial inequities in U.S. immigration laws. And people are asking, what is our menu for tomorrow? So I'll tell you, we're going to have 3 panel discussions for tomorrow. It's going to be, first of all, the Virginia and federal landscape of immigration. The second topic would be abolishing immigration detention in Virginia and beyond. And the third one, it will be race, ethnicity, and criminal justice. So you don't want to miss it. Make sure that you join us again tomorrow. But right now, it is my great pleasure to welcome you once again as our second topic of the afternoon or the morning would be implementation of Virginia's new driver privilege card law. This panel will discuss the application processes and requirements of Virginia's driver privilege card law, and what has that has expanded actually the driver privilege access to tens of thousands of undocumented immigrant residents. We will provide an overview of the application process, discuss frequent barriers and trouble spots, and potential remedies that applicants themselves can use to complete the application process. And our panelists for today, I wanted to mention that we also invited Mr. Richard D. Holcomb, which is Virginia DMV Commissioner. And I don't know if he will be able to join us, but we just wanted to let you know that we've reached out to his office. But our panelists are two very good friends and excellent leaders in Virginia that you all know, I'm certain. And I have Edgar Aranda Yanok, who is the co-founder of Drive Virginia Forward and senior lead organizer of the Legal Aid Justice Center. And with him, we have Edgar Lara, my very good friend, executive director of Sin Barreras, and a person that actually showed us that he could walk a long distance throughout Virginia to make sure that we all were aware the importance of getting involved with this issue. So thank you, both of you, and I turn it over to Edgar and Edgar.
Thank you, Beatriz, for this wonderful introduction. So I'm not sure, I want to check with my tocayo, Edgar Lara, if he already is co-host. Otherwise, please, we need him to be a co-host. So he's going to share, let's see.
But Edgar, do you want me to introduce a little bit more, or are you going to introduce Edgar further?
If you don't mind, thank you, Beatriz.
Okay, yes, I will do that. Edgar Lara works as the executive director of Sin Barreras, or translated Without Barriers. Edgar grew up in California's Central Valley, where he spent several summers as an immigrant worker throughout California. Despite the challenges and obstacles faced having an undocumented single mother in a largely undocumented community, it gave him the strong work ethic, family values, and sense of community and justice he carries in his work. After high school, he joined the Marine Corps, and where he was exposed to many countries and cultures, including deployment in the Middle East. He received his BS in business economics from UCLA and worked in consulting and business finance for 10 years, during which he arrived in Charlottesville in 2012. Lucky for us. The rise of hate, demonization of immigrants, and attacks on our society's most vulnerable communities prompted him to step away from his career to dedicate more time to help give our local Hispanic immigrant population a voice in supporting them through Sin Barreras. I am proud, he says, of my roots and where I come from, but I am as American as anyone. And he continues, I'm doing what I can to make my country better. Supporting the immigrant community, regardless of status, is how I am doing it, because we are all better off because of their sacrifices and contributions. So Edgar, please continue now. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for that introduction. As you now know, I'm Edgar Lara. I'm a longtime volunteer and board member of Sin Barreras Without Barriers, based in Charlottesville, and I have just over 1 month as its first executive director. So I'm very happy about that and excited and looking forward to the work that we do moving forward. Driver's licenses for all is one of the key issues that Sin Barreras has advocated for since I joined them 7 years ago. The driver privilege card was a result of many years of work. And although it wasn't 100% of what we wanted, it was a great victory. But getting it signed into law in 2020 didn't mean the work was over. We had to work on protecting and securing data privacy, which we did in the 2021 General Assembly. The last thing any of us wants is for people to put themselves at greater risk while working hard to comply with this new law and to improve their lives. And most critically, we had to work with the DMV to anticipate and try to minimize issues and challenges with the implementation of the DPCs. With the coalition of advocates, we did this work, and the implementation was better than it would have been otherwise as a result. Our work is far from over, though. We continue to work with DMV leadership to advocate for improvements. We also need to remain vigilant during the coming General Assembly to protect the DPCs and our community. So the presentation that we're about to go over with you is meant to share the basics along with information based on experience. So I'm going to share my screen now. Tocayo, we didn't coordinate, but feel free to jump in wherever you need to. So one of the questions here is it a license or a privilege card? It's really both, but it's definitely a question that a lot of people will ask, and we don't have a straight yes or no answer there, but it's a type of license that people without immigration status can have. But it's important to know that when people that want to get the DPC go to the DMV, it's important that they know that they're going to apply for a DPC, because if they walk in and ask for a driver's license and the representatives aren't sure what they're talking about, they may start asking for documents or requirements that they don't have. So it's important for them to know that they're applying for a DPC so that they're asked the right requirements and don't start off on the wrong foot. Because with nerves, language barrier, and other challenges, they, not knowing what you're walking in to apply for can lead to a bad experience, and we definitely want people to avoid that. So some of the first things we want to go over is, so there's three main types of licenses. There's the Real ID, which has the star on the upper right-hand corner. Necessary for domestic air travel starting last month, for citizens, permanent residents, and then other type of immigrants too, but it's higher level of requirements and documentation. We have the non-Real ID license, which is also for citizens, permanent residents, and other types of immigrants as well. But the big difference is that you can't travel domestically or enter federal building without other additional documents. And on the top right-hand corner, it says federal limits apply. Now, the driver privilege card looks pretty much exactly the same as the non-Real ID. It has the same upper right-hand corner, federal limits apply. It started in January, and it's primarily for people without status, but also for other people that are working on it or are just not eligible for the standard driver's license yet. The other thing to note here is that on the back of the card, it says temporary license in small letters, but there's the words driver privilege card are not anywhere on it, which is a huge improvement from any of the earlier versions of this potential card and driving access. The cost of the DPC and the renewal is $50. There are 5 basic requirements. We'll go into more detail on a couple of these shortly, but it's 2 proofs of identification, 2 proofs of address in Virginia, proof of prior year Virginia tax reporting, and that is one of the variations of the Virginia Form 760, and there's a few of those, but one of those. The proof of social security number, or ITIN. ITIN is individual tax identification number. And the proof for that is typically an assignment letter that people take into the DMV or wherever they need to. And then the same test that everybody else takes, the vision, knowledge, and skills test. For the proof of identity, there are 2 lists, the primary and secondary. You could go onto the DMV website for all the different details, but some of the more common items used from the primary list, or before that. So you need two proofs, two documents, two from the primary list, or one from the primary and another from the secondary. In the primary list, you can use a passport or some sort of identification from the consulate or other government agency. The important thing to note about this list is that those picture IDs can be expired and still qualify as, proof of identification up to 5 years. So if it's expired over 5 years, it won't be good. You can't use it, but under 5 years you can. And on the secondary list, one important item that I want to highlight is that people can use the proof of ITIN, that assignment letter, as their secondary proof. So really with that proof of ITIN, which they have to have anyway, and one form of identification from the primary list is sufficient for people. For proof of address in Virginia, it's same thing. There's a primary and secondary list. You need 2 items from the primary list, or one from the primary and one from the secondary. I bolded, there's a longer list on the DMV website, and in bold here is utility bills, because that seems to be the most common form of proof that's taken into the DMV. The important thing to note there, that it has to be 2 months old or less. And really a lot of the proof that people take is some letters with the address, current address. The important thing to note with proof of ID and proof of address, people take their strongest forms of proof, but oftentimes people have also taken other forms just in case. And that type of preparation and foresight has proved to be very, very useful in many situations. So I would say if you're speaking to people that are going to go into the DMV, that's not a bad idea at all. Take your 2 strongest forms, but take additional in case you need them, and sometimes they do. So next, I won't get into too much detail about this, but one thing that we've verified with allies who are attorneys and representatives is that the documents that people submit to the DMV are secure and protected. The full list and database of information in the DMV is also secure and protected. The data of individuals depend on their situation. So if people have a warrant or have some sort of government agency that's looking for them, like ICE, those people are definitely at greater risk, and the DMV will release that information when presented with appropriate requests and documents. So again, I won't get into those details, but generally, it appears that Virginia is one of the places that secures our information and data at the DMV best compared to other states. The other thing I want to say here is that, well, the work to protect our information at the DMV and other locations, that work is ongoing, and we have to remain vigilant for the DPC, but even beyond the DPC, just for our information in general. The process of obtaining the driver's privilege card is the same as it is for the driver's license. In the past couple of years, the wait time has been longer because we couldn't go into the DMV, and the appointments were really hard to get. But generally, it's still, you make the appointment, or now we're able to walk in, you present your documents, you take the test. If you haven't had a license before or in a different state, you'll get the driver's learner's permit, which you'll have to hold for 60 days before you can take the road skills test. Once you do take the road skills test, you'll be mailed, and you pass, you'll be mailed the license or driver privilege card by mail in 1 to 2 weeks. As I noted a second ago, the DMV is now open for walk-in service. It's on Tuesday, Thursdays, and Saturdays, but you can still make appointments, and they're appears to be many more appointments available online for most locations, but that varies between the different DMV centers. The knowledge test has two parts. First, it's the 10 questions on the traffic signs, which you have to get 100% on to move on to the second part, which consists of 30 questions you need to get 80% on to then get your learner's permit. Then there's the vision test. For the road skill test, like as I mentioned, you have to hold a learner's permit for 60 days, unless you had a license previously. Or the other thing that people need to know when they want to take the driver's the road test is that they'll need to go in there with an observation form that's completed or signed by a licensed driver. Oftentimes people are confused by this. They should pick this up in the moment that they pass the knowledge test and take it with them so that someone that they know observes these different maneuvers and certifies that by signing the form. This is something that people will need in order to then take the road skills test. Failing the knowledge test or the road skill test 3 times requires that you take additional driver's education and come back with certification that you took that course. These are different courses for the knowledge test and the driver's or the road skills test. But for either one, if you fail 3 times, you will have to go on and get additional education, which you pay for, and then come back with proof that you took that course in order to take the 4th or more tests for either. The DPC renewals are supposed to be sent by mail or email 90 days prior to the DPC expiring, and people are able to renew online or by mail every other cycle unless it's expired. If the person allows it to expire, they will have to go in to the DMV. So realities and challenges. I know my tocayo has a lot more to add, but the thing that I'll say to begin with is that DMV leadership, from the time we were looking to pass this law, has been supportive. But there's 73 DMV service centers, I believe, and the treatment and experiences varies between the centers. And I have 4 points here that I've seen people experience at different centers. And again, the different centers, some at times become known as friendlier and others less friendly than others. But the things that I've seen are things like just extra barriers that are sometimes added based on who you're speaking to. There's challenges at times in the DMV representative understanding what the tax documentation is supposed to look like. And a lot of this, we've in many situations given the DMV and representatives grace, but sometimes because it's a learning curve, it's something new that they haven't had to go through in the past. But yeah, that grace only goes so far. There are challenges at times, but these are the types of things that we're still working with the DMV leadership on, and things we'll go on to talk about here more in a moment. But a thing that we have also seen happen is where people walk away feeling with a general disregard. And I think there's multiple reasons for that. Language barriers are part of it, but it's not the only thing. At times it may feel like, or people do feel that there is a judgment when they walk in. So I think it's very important to, when we work with the community, to help them be as prepared as possible, help them walk in with confidence and possibly the list of documents where they can point to and say, this information and documents that I have brought in match what you are requiring on the website and in this paper. That it just helps for the overall experience, because when people walk in there with nerves, language barrier, and some people walk in without too much knowledge of how this is supposed to work, and they it pretty much depends on people or a representative helping them or being friendly and trying, and that doesn't always happen. The DMV is a busy place at times, and we know that doesn't always happen. So as much as possible, we want to help people prepare. Tocayo, would you like to continue from here? I'm not sure if you...
Okay, thank you, Tocayo. Well, I'm not sure if you can stop sharing your...
Yeah, I will.
So in that regard, we can see more people. Yeah, so thank you, Edgar Lara. I would like to thank everybody who joined the campaign. It was a very strong effort from the community. And thanks to all this work, we got this legislation. Of course, we also want to thank Senator Scott Surabel, Jennifer Boysko, Delegate Cathy Tram, Delegate Elizabeth Guzman, and many other legislators, and Basir, and all the members. It was a really huge work that was accomplished. But so implementation is another issue also. And also, I would like to here also to mention we partner with the DMV. So with Richard Holcomb, his office. So in that way, we have a direct contact for community events. We have a discussion about implementation and also the issues that were arising during this process. So we got direct communication with them, and the problems will solve not only for one office, but for the whole DMV, which will definitely was very helpful. So, and also, I want to mention how we receive these complaints or all the problems. We are very active in the social media, especially Facebook. You can look for us and Drive Virginia Forward. I put the link there. And also you can look for VACOLAO, Virginia Coalition for Latino Organizations, Legal Aid Justice Center, Sin Barreras. So in all these websites or the fan page, you can send us messages and you will find a lot of information. Also phone calls, WhatsApp, also it's a huge venue for the community. And communication with local advocates. Many people were contacting us statewide, all the problems that was arising. How we address them, we have limited access, so it's hard for us to address all the issues. But the good thing is through the social media and also with the information that we create, so people were getting themselves all the information and they were empowered to challenge the issues directly with the DMV. So that was great to see how people, they even knew better than many workers in the DMV, because it was a new program and they were ready because the education that happened before the implementation that happened in January 1st, 2021. So that was a huge accomplishment, and people still know, and they are even, when we make videos live, people are talking each other. For instance, I see Alejandra is there. I see Amalia and also Mayra, Lenka. They are responding when we are doing videos. They are responding all these questions, and they are directly also contact the community. So that's how we are working, and really with few resources, we have done so much. And I am very happy to say that we have already 32,278 driver privilege card credentials, and through Sunday, October 3rd, 2021. That's the information from the DMV that they send us. So there's so many people who already got the DPC. We are expecting 200,000, so it is not even half what we are expecting. And this will continue because we are going to be fighting to keep this legislation alive, and even we need to make it even better. So that's the good thing. Maybe we are going to have immigration reform, we don't know. But the thing that I know is that every day are coming to Virginia new immigrants, and this legislation will help to everybody. So, and also I would like to point here. So one of the biggest issues that we have also was with appointments. The good thing is, as it was mentioned earlier, so at the beginning, it was all about how can I do an appointment? It was difficult, and we create videos, and it was very helpful. However, there are many people who didn't watch the videos, and they were caught for people who, unfortunately, taking advantage of that part. So they were charging $200 until $600 for an appointment, and also for the promise that they will do all the process so to get a privilege card. So that was bad. So we addressed that. And so unfortunately, there were many people who paid $200 just for one appointment. But we avoid that with the knowledge through the social media. And also there is a lot of barriers, the language barriers. Still, that's a huge issue. People cannot get translators, or the DMV is providing translators only for COVID-19, but they are not providing, they are allowing people to bring their own interpreters at the DMV. But now even it was restricted to certain places. So there is a whole list of places where people can bring their translators to take the driving test. But for the knowledge test is another thing. So in a presentation that the DMV did with us back in June 8th of this year, they announced if you do not speak any of the 24 languages that is provided, the interpretation in the machine, so you can bring an interpreter, and they will help you to guide you. So how it's working, we don't know yet. So we don't know, but we haven't had a lot of questions about it. But that's what they announced. So hopefully this is working, but they are not providing interpreters, so you can bring your own. But in the test in the computer, you can choose one interpreter, Spanish or other language. There are 24 languages. So other things that I also want to make sure that people really understand this. There are things that please ask people who you are serving or you're helping to read all the list of documents, because that's a huge problem. Sometimes they go, they haven't read the list, and they bring things that they shouldn't, or things. For instance, there is a case of a person who brought, it was the declaration tax. I don't remember the form, but it was a social security number that it was not real. It was made up social security to get a job. So, and they brought that, and that's, please advise them, do not bring that kind of documents, because they could bring a lot of problems with them, criminal problems. So the best thing is just do your tax, the Virginia tax, and then forget the other things. And then with that, they will be fine. So, and read the whole guides that Edgar Lara mentioned. With that, they will be fine. And also, so when you go to the DMV changes. So Edgar, you mentioned, so in different places will be different. So please ask the people that you're helping to print the documents. For instance, in the website says clearly one issue, how it should be handled, but they do not read, even the DMV. So if your client or people who you are serving brings all these documents highlighted, that you can show them and they will help them. That is amazing how this is working. The applications, and also we recommend the people should print and bring the DPC application already filled out, because that what happened, if this person goes, they are going to give them the travel license application. And that happened. Unfortunately, there was a person who brought its, no, he asked, he wants a driver license, but the real thing he wanted is a DPC. And then he was, unfortunately, was not served because he wasted his time. And at the end, when he was taking the test, no, you cannot take, you need your social security number. So things like that happen. And also, if someone is denied the ability to apply, the DMV must give a written reason for why. So I remember that was a big push from Legal Aid Justice Center when we submitted our comments. That was one of the things that we request. It should be written the reason why you are being denied. And the DMV agreed. So please, they can ask them if somebody was denied, it should be a written reason. So, and also, yeah, there is also, they can take the screenshots about the forms that they can send it to us and we will process. So please make sure, yeah, they can communicate with us through Drive Virginia Forward and we will help them with that issues. So regarding passing the test, thanks to Reestablish Richmond, so we did with the coalition videos, 6 videos about how to take the test. So you can find in YouTube and VACOLAO, we have thousands of people now following us or watching our videos in VACOLAO. So you will find each link of what you need to know to pass the written test. That was great to work with the Reestablish Richmond. So what I would like to do is I would like to open for Q&A. So because we are running out of time, but I have a lot of things that I can share. But I rather open for questions and we can answer the questions. But before that, I want to read here what the DMV says. Nova CS continue to be the busiest, occupying all of the top 11 spots. Sterling is the biggest, and then it comes Tyson Corners. And one of the quoting that I want to read here is, it says, we believe that these consistent numbers are great. So speaking of the number of people who are applying, we believe that these consistent numbers are great indicators that our DPC customers and our employees are getting more comfortable with the process, and the customers are getting more appointments and are better prepared when they get to the DMV. So that's the key. If they are well prepared and they bring all the documents, it's not going to be a problem. So please send it to us, or with all the information that we are providing you today, help them. Because if you don't help the community, people who are in need, others are going to take advantage and they are going to charge $600 for this process and with lies. So just let's open for Q&A. So thank you.
Edgar, do you mind expanding a little bit more about perhaps whether there is any process to bring into justice the persons that are abusing the community by charging $600, which is egregious, and then basically to explain to the community that this is a process where they must be there, present anyway. So can you address that, please, a little bit more?
A question for Edgar Lara. Yeah, so if I understand well your question, Beatriz, so you would like to know more about the process, or?
No, basically, because I have received complaints in the Hampton Roads area over the fact that people, basically are being charged such a large amount, and nevertheless people have to go to the DMV anyway, and people probably misunderstand that these companies will do the process without the persons having to go personally to the DMV, and maybe that is what they're trying to avoid. But are there
Yeah.
any complaints that have been filed, and are there any processes to basically for the community to protect themselves, or is just
Exactly. Yeah, thank you, Beatriz. It is clear your question. So first of all, I would like to put this very clear that so for the driving test, people, many people are taking classes with, but the recommendation will be, please take it with a accredited school. The school has to be accredited by the DMV. Otherwise, they're going to waste their time, and not their time, but their money, because what they want is a certification that they took this test. So only accredited schools will give them the certification so that they can go to the DMV and get the DPC. If they are taking classes with others who are not accredited, unfortunately, they are going to waste their money. They might learn to drive, but no anything else. So regarding the process for a complaint, yes, there is a process. There are people who complain. There was a person who was denied, or he was subject of discrimination. Yeah, so he went to take the test, and he asked in his broken English that he cannot speak English well, so he needs Spanish to take the test in Spanish. And this person clearly understood that. And then, however, she put it in the monitor in English. And he began to take the test. And once he began the test, you cannot change it. And then he complained, say, please, I ask you in Spanish. And she said, I'm sorry, that's too bad. And then he said, well, I'm not going to take it. And then he left. And then he asked us, what can he do? So we said that you can complain, and we asked him to call the DMV in Richmond. So he directly cannot do it, but he can talk with the manager of the DMV. He didn't ask to talk with the manager. That's the first step. And then they will provide also the form to do a complaint. But when you talk with the manager, they always try to solve the problem. So, but then he said, I am not going back to that place. I will go to other place. And he tried to other place, and he was treated well with dignity and everything. And then he took the test and he passed. And he said, I don't want to do any complaint. I passed, and that's fine. So, but the advice is, please, if in a place you are rejected, or you cannot take, they are treating you bad because you are going to find bad employees, please ask them to go to another DMV, or they can complain, or they can go to other DMV, and the treatment will be different. And we identify in places where people are treated better than other places because many people are calling us. So that will be my advice in that regard.
I have a question about what you guys were talking about. Well, I have two. The first one is, how do we identify the ones that are credited? The places that they're credited, where do we go look at it? Look for those locations. And the second one is, we're talking about the victims that are, do we have a local like legal center that we can go to? I'm talking about Richmond. Depending on what city you're from, do we have a place that we can actually, like a list of lawyers that are helping victims that are being taken advantage, $600, $200 for the driver's privilege card?
Yeah, Cynthia, thank you for your question, and also thank you for all your work that you did to get the driver pledge card. So, yeah, it is really great to see you, and thank you for your question. So, yeah, yes, Cynthia, it has been a while. I'm happy to see you. So, yeah, the DMV. So, I will try to find, while we are answering these questions, the DMV has a website. I mean, in its website, you will find all the schools. It has to be there. And they always publicize the schools accredited. So you can find it there, but I will try to find it for you. And so regarding the complaints or the organizations, so there are, for instance, if there is a, if you see when an issue becomes like fraud, that will be the issue. Legal Aid Justice Center is trying to see things that where you can see fraud, but there are other issues like if people are saying, I will charge you 200 and this is a free market, I don't know how to proceed in that case. So, and that's something that maybe an attorney can guide us on that. But they are even putting an advertisement. So I will charge you to get your appointment, this amount. And people call, and the desperation brings it to that point. But issues where it's clearly, for instance, 2 weeks ago, we publicized a link because somebody was sending a link, please fill out your information with the social security number, with tax ID, your date of birth, so many things. So we identify and we send it to the Attorney General office, that link, and say, please, this is happening. And also we immediately made a posting in Facebook asking people, do not fill out this form. This is fraud. And so you are going to be subject of identity theft. So things like that, it is the fastest way to do it from my point of view. But yeah.
And we have Alejandra Ponciano. Alejandra, go ahead.
Alejandra.
Hola, buenos días. Estoy trabajando, pero no me podía perder este evento. Y pues primero decirles, ¿verdad? Para los que no me conocen, mi nombre es Alejandra Ponciano. Soy una de las 33,000 personas beneficiadas de obtener su tarjeta de privilegio. Les agradezco mucho su trabajo y el apoyarnos como comunidad indocumentada. Yo he aprendido mucho de todos, pero especialmente de Edgar Aranda. Él es como un catedrático y nos ha enseñado que el conocimiento es poder. Así que entre más conozcamos nosotros la ley, más protegidos vamos a estar. Y fue así que yo mi conocimiento de cómo obtener mi tarjeta de privilegio lo obtuve gratis y de la misma manera se la compartí a las demás personas. Yo voluntariamente hice muchísimas citas para el DMV para las personas y actualmente todavía recibo muchos agradecimientos de la gente que ya ha pasado sus exámenes, pero a pesar de eso, he recibido también muchas personas que no han pasado el examen. Lamentablemente, nuestra comunidad, hay muchas personas que no saben leer ni escribir y ahí es uno de los motivos por los cuales ellos fallan el examen. Y sabemos que las 3 veces de ellos ir al DMV, pues van a necesitar una escuelita. Y fue así como ustedes los que me conocen saben que soy bien persistente y necia. Y fue así como yo conseguí a una escuelita certificada con la que sentí el interés de la profesora de querer ayudar. Y hemos podido ayudar a muchas personas. Edgar Lara la conoce, hemos ido a Charlottesville y hemos conocido las historias de la gente y mucha gente se queja del servicio del DMV, se quejan de que ellos se sienten discriminados. Yo creo que especialmente es por el idioma. Y otra cosa también es que hay muchas personas de nuestra comunidad que ya saben leer, pero el DMV entre sus requisitos está que tienen que pasar 7 clases. Entonces, muchas veces tal vez las escuelitas quieren ayudar, pero lo quieren hacer de la manera correcta. Entonces, hay algo ahí como que se necesita arreglar con el DMV, o sea, porque hay mucha gente que sabe manejar, y entonces solo es como ir a que se le evalúe, pero ellos no quieren ir al DMV a evaluarse porque tienen miedo del idioma, tienen miedo de que por no entender el idioma, ellos no vayan a perder el examen. Y pues mi pregunta es que, ¿qué pasa con las personas que no saben leer y escribir? ¿Qué recursos hay para ellos? Y también por si ahí está la Viviana Herbas, que es la dueña de la escuelita, también sería bueno que ella hablara para dar un poquito, viendo las cosas desde el punto de vista de la escuela. Hay mucha gente que quiere ir a la escuela y que ahí mismo que así se pase el examen, y creo que todavía hay un poquito de mala información. Así que muchas gracias por todo y seguimos en la lucha.
Thank you, Alejandra. Yeah, Alejandra, she made a video how she received her travel privilege card and was viral. So we share and drive Virginia forward. Thank you for all your advocacy as well, Alejandra. So for the questions, I'm not sure, Tocayo, would you like to go ahead?
Yeah, well, there's one thing I'd like to say about the question that was asked earlier about like what we do about those cases. And I don't have a good answer for it, but I have, I've heard this from people in the community, right? When they see people advertising, a service for like a lot of money, taking advantage, it looks like, and the people that I've talked to, there's been some that kind of start talking about how maybe I should call, maybe I should do this or that to try to do something about it. And I appreciate like that desire, but I recommended that just caution that you're not the police, you're not an attorney, so just be careful. I think documenting, reporting, and communicating with other advocates, hopefully we can get to a better answer. But those individuals, I would just say, because there might be some of those people here that, and I see it too, and you'd like to do something, but you don't, if that's not the position that you have, if you don't know how to do it, then talk to other advocates instead of trying to do something about it yourself, because those people may be criminals and you don't want to interact with them, and it could be dangerous for you. So I just wanted to say that that's the advice I've given to people locally that I've spoken to about it. Like, yes, report it, let us know, we should talk about this. I don't have a good answer for you yet, but don't go perform your own sting operation. I just wanted to mention that.
Thank you, Tocayo. So, yeah, the questions about the language access is a huge issue. I remember the Northam administration, they were collecting information about the language access in different places. And one of them was the DMV. So the DMV right now, as I mentioned, is providing only the 24 languages, how they mention in our presentation. So, but to improve or to expand the languages, it has to be definitely through the government. And I think that was the goal with the Northam administration. But unfortunately, things are changing quickly. So we don't know what is going to be with this. So Reestablish Richmond, they have a huge project with that. So I think definitely we need to keep moving towards that direction. But I don't have a clear answer right now. So that's going to be a huge, that we need to work on that. But so far, I don't know even how it's going to change with this new administration about that you are able to bring your interpreter to the driving test. But we need to advocate to expand it. That's only for the COVID-19, but it should be the policy, the general policy. So yeah, we need you guys to work on that because we need to improve the DMV service as well.
And Edgar, going back to the language access and interpretation, are there any rules as to who can you bring to interpret for you? And the reason I'm asking this question is because, you know, as you know, my husband, you know, as a physician, when we had patients, sometimes families bring their children to interpret for them. So I just wanted to know whether there's some guidance in that regard that we can maybe give.
Not to my knowledge, there is no like strict rules like in voting rights. So you have to have very strict rules for that. In this case, there is no like that. So you bring somebody who can help you and they will check. But
yeah, and I see Viviana Hervas raising her hand. Go ahead, Viviana.
Hi. First of all, I just wanted to say thank you to everybody, you know, for doing everything that you guys have been doing for the community. I'm brand new to all of, you know, the advocates, to everything that everyone is doing. I am just so overwhelmed with everything that you guys have been able to accomplish. So just a little bit about myself. I do own a driving school in the Sterling, Virginia area. And I'm also Hispanic, and I'm actually a dreamer. So I just wanted to share a little bit of that information. But my question that I had, Edgar, was, so do you have any idea of how the tests in the computer are administered for those? So I think they have several languages, but for the people that can't read or write, they have to take it in Spanish and they have to pick up a phone. And on the phone, it reads them the test. So I guess my question is it something that repeats and repeats all over for them as many times as they need to? Or is it something that they just get it once and they have to figure out the answer? Do you happen to know any of that?
Edgar mentioned your name, Edgar, so go ahead. That's a good thing to have, Tocayo. Yeah, so unfortunately, we don't know that process. Yeah, at least I don't know. So I talk with people about it, but I do not have that experience. Maybe Edgar Lara? No. Yeah. But thank you for your question. So Viviana, but I cannot provide that. And definitely, we need to follow up with the DMV. So we invite Richard Holcomb or anybody from the DMV, but unfortunately, well, there is a change of the government, so things are going to be different. So, but thank you.
Are there any other questions?
I'm not sure if everybody noticed it, but I did put in the chat a complaint email address that I received from DMV leadership a couple months ago.
And I see.
Thank you, Edgar Lara.
Go ahead, Beatriz.
No, I was just saying thank you. Are there any other questions? Yes, I see Ilsa, you have your hand raised up. Can you please ask your question?
Sí, buenas tardes. Mi nombre es Elsa. Yo también soy una beneficiaria de la tarjeta de privilegio y les quiero dar las gracias a todos por su arduo trabajo. Yo tengo unas preguntas. Yo soy voluntaria en un centro comunitario y muchas personas me vienen a mí a preguntarme que tienen su tarjeta de privilegio, su permiso, pero no tienen el dinero para poder pasar su examen para una escuela. Entonces, no sé si hay alguna ayuda o algo para esas personas. Esa es mi pregunta, porque muchas personas vienen a mí y me preguntan si los podemos ayudar para poder sacar su escuela, pues. Y la mayoría son personas como yo que ya somos mayores de edad, adultos, que es primera vez que vamos a manejar. Entonces dice, o pagamos la escuela o tenemos un carro para pagar la aseguranza. Entonces son muchas las cosas que preguntan. Gracias.
Thank you, Elsa. Nice to see you too. So I don't know of an organization that is providing that kind of support, but I think, for instance, in Barreras was providing classes, I think driving classes. Tocayo, I'm not sure if you can talk more about it.
Well, that was more of a collaboration with Viviana, who's on here too, and Alejandra, to bring the re-examination course to Charlottesville. Like there's not a Spanish speaking course, but that was the course that you pay for, bringing it from Northern Virginia to our local area. So it's not exactly answering her question, I don't think.
Yeah. Yeah, so we'll try to find something, but so far we were not successful. The same thing when we were looking for classes to take the test, the knowledge test. So we were lucky to find, to talk with Reestablish Richmond, and they were providing that classes. So now it's available and thousands of people are watching that videos. But for the driving test, yeah, this is a different issue. So we will keep doing that, Elsa, but unfortunately at this point, we couldn't find somebody who can do that. It requires insurance and many things because it's a driving test, so it is more difficult.
There's a lot of work to be done. I just want to inform everybody that it is 11:48. We are supposed to take a break at 11:50, but I see 2 hands raised up. I think, Elsa, if you finish, do you mind lowering your hand? And I have Ninfa and Alejandra again. I'm going to ask both of you to ask your question, one after the other, and then we will have Edgar Aranda Yanok and Edgar Lara address those questions. Go ahead, Ninfa, and then Alejandra.
Morning. I just had a question if you all could touch on how the DPC cards affects undocumented youth. So what's the process like, or how is it different compared to like an immigrant adult versus under 18 youth? Thank you.
And Alejandra, go ahead with your question.
Sí, mi pregunta es la siguiente, o sea, que tal vez lo que se refiere Elsa es de que las personas cuando ya van 3 veces al DMV, ellas no pueden regresar una 4ª vez si no llevan la certificación de una escuelita de haber completado 8 horas de estudio del manual. Y lo que pasa es de que nosotros sabemos, nuestra comunidad vive de cheque en cheque. Hay mucha gente, bueno, muchas mamás solteras, la renta, todo. Entonces, lo que quisiéramos conseguir son como, bueno, en el caso de la escuelita de Viviana, no sé si hay otras escuelitas interesadas, Viviana ha buscado sponsors, gente que pueda patrocinar esa clase a las personas que lo necesitan. Era solo lo que quería agregar. Gracias.
Gracias, Alejandra. Adelante, Edgar Lara y Edgar Aranda Llano con las respuestas a las preguntas. La primera pregunta era sobre si el proceso de aplicar a la licencia de conducir, cómo aplica eso a las personas que son jóvenes como Ninfa.
So the issue was the tax. They have to be declared dependent. That's one of the requirements is you have to have a declaration of the tax, tax declaration. So we got a lot of questions about it. But then the process, I'm not sure about because you have to be older than 16 years old to get a driver license. The same thing applies, but it is more about the taxes in this case.
Okay, Well, thank you so very much. It is 11, exactly 50 minutes past 11 a.m. and our time for this session has ended. But I would like to really thank Edgar Lara and Edgar Andayanok, together with a lot of the people present here that worked for many years in this effort. So again, thank you very much. Please don't go away. Stay tuned up with our summit because we have another session that is very important. So at this moment, you have 10 minutes for a break, and then please return to us. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Beatriz.
We learning that is wonderful. And I think we can get ready to begin. Again, good morning, everyone. Good afternoon this time. Thank you so very much for joining us again. If you just joined us, this is the 12th Virginia Immigrant Advocates Summit 2021. This is a two-day summit. And we have had two panel discussions already. And we are about ready to begin our third session, which is racial inequities in U.S. immigration laws. And in order to fully understand our current broken immigration system, it is necessary to understand how we got to where we are today. And this presentation will track the racism history of the major immigration policies in the United States and illustrate the endemic inequities that pervade our current immigration structure. And I am going to introduce Fazia Dean, who will be kind enough to introduce our panelists for today. Fazia Dean is a mother of three children, was born and raised in Latin America, Guyana, where she attended Roman Catholic school, completed high school in Canada. She's an undergraduate study at Indiana University and practiced law for 11 years in Indiana after receiving her Juris Doctorate from Thomas Cooley Law School of Western Michigan University. Dealt with divorce, amicable separation, custody cases, juvenile, and CHINS clinic, while she was the corporate wellness director for one of the largest wellness centers in Indiana. Currently, she's serving the public as the Deputy Outreach Director for Dar al-Hijra Islamic Center in Falls Church, Virginia. Always challenging racism, she specializes in interfaith community outreach, civic engagement, and her advocacy for equity, justice, and fairness led to her mentorship in life coaching to women and teens in the surrounding communities. Fazia recently received the 2020 annual Honoring Role Model Award, and this award recognizes her work to empower women and their families. Fazia, go ahead and introduce Dominique Poirier and Stephanie Barnes. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Beatriz. I would like to go ahead and Dominique, please forgive me if I butcher your last name, Dominique Poirier. Thank you. Director of Legal Services at Just Neighbors, and has been with Just Neighbors since 2008, and also serves as one of the national consulting attorneys for the national justice for our neighbors. At Just Neighbors, Dominique focuses on humanitarian-based immigration cases, and she is an alumna of the University of Virginia, where she achieved a BA in Foreign Affairs and Juris Doctorate. Thank you for being here, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. I truly appreciate it, and I'm so excited to talk to you all today about how we got to this incredibly broken immigration system that we have. This is more than an hour-long presentation, but I have less than an hour, so I'm going to speak very quickly. I am going to skip some slides and a little bit of information in an attempt to save space for questions. So let's get started. First, before I start, I want to frame just a couple of concepts. And the first is that this presentation focuses on immigration laws in the US. So that's really from the late 18th century to the present. But I want to acknowledge our entire racist history that even predates the founding of the United States government. Both the forced migration and human trafficking of Africans, the enslavement of Blacks here in the United States, the expulsion and deportation of indigenous peoples from their own lands. And all of this treatment sort of echoes the treatment that we see with immigrants post-US founding. The other thing I want to say is that I want to get away from the idea of looking at the intent behind laws or policies. It is, in some instances, when we're going through all the laws that we have, the intent will be very clear, and there are often times in our history where the intention of the law was written clear. It was to keep out non-whites. But really what I want to focus is to shift us to focus on racist outcomes and not intent. So regardless of the intention of the founders of these policies and laws, if the law has a disparate impact on immigrants of color, then it's racist, and it doesn't matter what the intent is. So let's just, sort of shift our focus from intention to outcomes. Okay, so let's get started. We're talking, Okay, we're talking about three distinct areas of US immigration policy or law. The first is the overt racist era, and that's more or less from the founding of the US to the early World War II era. Then we had a period of attempted reformation that lasted more or less, it co-aligned with the civil rights movement in the United States. And then we have our present distinct era, which is the era of covert racist law. What do I mean by overt and covert racist law? Overt racist laws were laws that were clearly racist on their face, and Chinese exclusion laws and so forth. Covert racist laws are laws that appear facially neutral, but have a disparate impact on immigrants of color. Not unlike some of our voting restriction laws that are that have been passed in the last century and this century that seem facially neutral but have a disparate impact on voters of color. Okay, so let's start with the overt racist period, which largely ran from 1790 to the beginning of World War II. Starting with 1790, we had our first Naturalization Act. So up to that point, obviously the US didn't exist. So Congress passed a law that only free whites of good moral character could naturalize, could become US citizens, and it required 2 years of residency in the United States. Obviously excluded were Blacks, indigenous people, indentured servants of all colors. Also excluded were women. So although it just says free whites of good moral character, this law pertained only to men. That didn't mean that women couldn't naturalize, but they could only do so through a spouse or parent. In 1795, the residency requirements was amended to 5 years. During our war with France, it went up to 14 years. And then in 1802, it reverted back to 5 years where it stands today. So a lawful permanent resident, typically speaking, needs to have 5 years of lawful permanent residence before they can naturalize. So that is a very, very old law. In 1848, we had the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, which moved the US border. So this was after our war with Mexico, where we acquired, some say stole, 55% of land belonging to Mexico. So this is a huge swath of Mexico became part of the United States. All of Texas, parts of California, Colorado, Arizona, New Mexico, Utah, and Nevada. And Mexico recognized the Rio Grande as our US southern border. We made promises under this treaty. We made promises to protect the land, the culture, the language of former Mexicans living in the United States. Those promises clearly have been broken, and that echoes the treatment of promises made in treaties to indigenous peoples. And the other bizarre thing is that the treaty permitted the naturalization of Mexicans. So Mexican citizens had to choose between US citizenship and Mexican citizenship. How did they do this? Because as you know, starting in 1790, only free whites could naturalize. And it was thought that Mexicans were not white. However, the Congress used the reverse one-drop rule. So the one-drop rule being that if you had 1 drop of African blood, you were eligible to be enslaved here in the United States. The reverse 1-drop rule, meaning that Mexicans were considered to have at least 1 drop of Spanish blood. Spain is part of Europe. Europe is white. Therefore, Mexicans could be considered free whites and able to naturalize under this particular provision. So this was a way to permit non-whites to obtain naturalization. In 1854, we bought a little bit more territory from Mexico, and that completed sort of our southern border. In 1968, you have the 14th Amendment that held that all persons born or naturalized in the US and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States. So this obviously permitted the freed slaves to obtain US citizenship. However, excluded were again indigenous peoples because they were thought not to be subject to the jurisdiction thereof. So we are now 100 years and almost into the founding of the United States, and still many, many people of color are kept out of obtaining US citizenship and everything that comes with it. Okay, 1882, you have the first Immigration Act. So I want to just stop for a second. We are 100 years into the founding of the US, and all the laws have been about who can naturalize. There is no law regarding migration whatsoever. This is the first time we have a law that actually seeks to control migration. It occurred at the beginning of 1882. Up at that point, there had been quite a number of immigrants coming that were non-white. This was not preferable for the dominant culture. And so this act tried to keep out convicts, lunatics, any persons unable to take care of themselves. So this is the beginning of our public charge in admissibility grounds, which was clearly targeted at Chinese people, actually. And then later on that year, Congress just decided, look, let's forget about this facially neutral law trying to keep out Chinese people. We're just going to pass a law that keeps out Chinese people. So there had been quite a bit of immigration, particularly to the western part of the United States, of Chinese people. And the first law in 1882 restricted immigration of Chinese people, whether skilled or unskilled, for 10 years. Those Chinese nationals that had already been living in the United States by 1880 could remain under the act, but they had to get a certificate attesting to their status as either, a scholar, a laborer, a diplomat, a merchant, and they got this certificate from their own government, and it was very, very hard to get. So this kind of echoes the papers that freed Blacks had to carry around to prove their status. It also echoes what's going on today. White people walking around do not have to carry around certificates showing that they're US citizens, but immigrants do, and those are largely immigrants of color. And it all started with immigrants of color back in the late 19th century.
Dominique, this is Beatriz, and I'm listening here. The interpreter is asking if you could please slow down the presentation. So don't worry about time. I think the subject matter is very important. So we will go a little bit over. So
okay, thank you. Yeah, I thought that might be an issue. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Okay.
Thank you.
In 1888, we have the Scott Act, which barred reentry of Chinese nationals who had been living in the US. So remember, under the 1882 law, if you had been here as a Chinese national and you got your certification, you could stay. But in 1888, they passed another law which made it harder for Chinese nationals to stay, because if you left, you couldn't re-enter. And then in 1892, we had the second passage of the Chinese Exclusion Act. Remember, the 1882 Act only lasted for 10 years. So in 1892, it's sunsetting, and we pass, and this is the actual name, the Act to Prohibit the Coming of Chinese Persons into the United States. And that extended the Chinese Exclusion Act for another 10 years. It also added a provision where those Chinese found to be living in the US illegally could be criminally prosecuted and sentenced to 1 year of hard labor. That provision was later struck down as unconstitutional, but this is the first time and one of the only times until our present day where I found this marriage between criminal conduct and the alien, the non-citizen. And note that it is only applied to immigrants of color. Okay, in 1898, we have the seminal case of Wong R. Kim. Mr. Kim was born in the United States. His parents were Chinese nationals. They were unable to obtain citizenship. And he had previously traveled to China and was able to re-enter the United States without issue. Then he went a second time. And when he tried to get back into the United States, he was barred from re-entry as not being a US citizen. So this is the first time the Supreme Court is faced with an actual 14th Amendment case, at least in the immigration context. And thankfully, the Supreme Court held and affirmed the fundamental principle that children born on American soil are US citizens without regard to their parent status. So finally, Mr. Kim was able to enter the United States. In 1906, we have the Basic Naturalization Act. And this was the attempt by Teddy Roosevelt to really put immigration and naturalization under one federal agency. It created the US Naturalization Service, and it also granted only federal judges the right to decide who could become a US citizen. So up to this point, it was state and local judges that were determining, are you a free white person? Are you a person of good moral character? A person being man. This gave that decision-making over to federal judges, and they were granted the sole discretion in order to decide who was white and who was good moral character. In 1917, you have the Naturalization Act of 1917. So again, up to this point, everything's about naturalization. We are excluding immigrants of color. There are no laws regarding white people to immigrate. The 1917 law, at this point, we're starting to see immigration from whites who are thought to be of lower character to the dominant caste. And so Congress passes an immigration of the Naturalization Act of 1917. What this does is it broadens the exclusion of Asians, not just to Chinese people, but all of Asia, including parts of the Middle East. So it created an Asiatic barred zone. So now so many people of color are not able to immigrate, okay? But then it also created a literacy test in order to try to keep out Eastern Europeans, specifically Jews and Southern Europeans, and it increased the head tax to $8 a head for people coming on ships to the US. We have two cases in the early 20s that really speak to who could naturalize. The first is Ozawa, and that was brought by Takeo Ozawa. He was a Japanese individual born in Japan, and he applied to naturalize and he was denied on the grounds that he wasn't a white person. So he appeals the decision. It goes up to the Supreme Court, where the Supreme Court decides that a white person, remember only free whites can naturalize. We're now in 1922, pretty old law at this point. Supreme Court says that a white person means those that are popularly known as the Caucasian race. So then the next year you have Mr. Thind. Mr. Thind is a veteran, fought for the US in the First World War. He's a minister. He's very involved in his community. He's actually granted citizenship, then it's revoked, then he applies again and he's denied, and he appeals. Case goes to the Supreme Court, where they say, wait. So we said Caucasian, but when we mean Caucasian, we're not talking in the scientific sense. We're talking about how that word is popularly understood, words of common speech and not scientific origin, written for the common understanding of unscientific men. They deny him the right to naturalize. So these two decisions don't make any sense, except that they're both racist. The complete attempt to try to keep out non-whites from naturalizing. And because of this, the Thind decision, more than 50 Indian families were retroactively stripped of citizenship. Remember that women could not naturalize on their own. And so you had families that would naturalize all together if the men were granted naturalization. And many people lost their citizenship, and their lives were destroyed, and they lost property and business as well. In 1924, you had the National Origins Act. Okay, so what's going on here? We're into the 1920s. We've had a lot of immigration from Europe, but previously to the early 20th century, that immigration had largely been Northern and Western European. And then starting, around the First World War, you see a lot more Eastern Europeans coming, Jews coming, Southern Europeans, Italians coming, and so forth. And this doesn't sit well with the dominant white class. The 1917 Act, the literacy test, had not proven effective in keeping out unwanted whites. And so you have the National Origins Quota Act that's passed. And what this does is it sets quotas for each nationality at 2% of the foreign-born population. But it's not the foreign-born population from the 1920 census, which would have been just previous to 1924. Because by 1920, the white immigrant population is starting to get more diverse. And so they actually go back to the 1890 census, when immigration was mostly of Northern and Western European heritage. And they set the 2% of the foreign-born population based on the 1890 census, all right? So we're not even talking about racism. At this point, we're talking about caste. We're talking about a caste system where non-whites are completely excluded, and only certain whites are permitted to enter. All right, and then obviously everybody from Asia is excluded, Middle East as well. So, just to give you an example, under this 1924 Act, about 50,000 of the visas per year would be given to Germans, but only 4,000 to Italians, just as an example. The only thing good that happened in 1924 was that finally Congress passed the Indian Citizenship Act, which finally granted, we're now, 150 years into the founding of the US, finally grants US citizenship to indigenous peoples born in what is now the US. This does not ensure their right to vote, because the voting is still considered more or less under the purview of the states, but they are finally considered US citizens. I'm not going to go into detail about the treatment of Mexicans due to time, except to say that it's been deplorable, and that we have, deported Mexicans over and over throughout our history when they are no longer useful for us, and deported them from land which historically had been theirs. Obviously, land that previously had been indigenous, and then land that became part of Mexico, that we took back. So, once we get to the reform era, at the beginning of World War II, we are in a situation, we are pretty far into the founding of the United States here. Only whites can naturalize, and virtually only whites can come to the US legally. Nobody else can enter. And that really is important when we get to the later reform era and our current era. So what happens starting with this reform era? Well, we're at war, okay? And China is our ally. And we don't look too good because we don't let Chinese people naturalize here in the US. We also don't let them enter legally. And so we passed the Magnuson Act in 1943, which it was formerly known as the Chinese Exclusion Repeal Act. It permitted Chinese nationals who were living in the US to acquire US citizenship finally. So 1943 is the first time that a Chinese national could get a US citizenship. And it also permitted the legal migration of Chinese, but there was a quota system. Those quotas were set pretty low. It was thought there would be an onslaught of Chinese migration, and this would disrupt the whiteness of the immigrant population. So we actually set those quotas pretty low, but it was a step in permitting immigration of non-whites, the legal migration of non-whites. And then in 1952, you had the first Immigration and Nationality Act. So up to this point, we had just like these little laws here and there about naturalization or literacy tests or quota systems or what have you. This is the first time that we try to codify the laws in one place. And it's the beginning of our family-based and employment-based immigration system. So it's an attempt at a comprehensive legislation. However, it did, for the most part, keep in place those national origin quotas of 1924. So while it did seek to promulgate a broad scheme for immigration, it kept in place those national origin quotas. The one good thing this law did is repeal any vestiges of the Asian exclusion law, and it broke up that Asiatic barred zone. And so this was, again, a small step in reform to permit the legal migration of non-whites. I just want to point out in 1953, we also had a Refugee Relief Act. So I just want to point out this is really the first time that we recognize that there are other reasons why people migrate besides economic reasons. Maybe they're being persecuted. And so this is really the beginning of our humanitarian based immigration system, which is very small, not a lot of visas given out every year, but it exists, and this is the seed of that. Then in 1965, you have the big kahuna. You have the Hart-Celler Act. Okay, Senator Celler had advocated in 1952 with the passage of the first Immigration and Nationality Act. He had advocated for the breakup of the quota system, the national quota system. I identified it as being racist and not a good face for America to have in the global world. And with the help of Representative Hart, he was able to convince colleagues in the House and the Senate to get rid of the national origins quota. And the bill was really supported for two reasons. The first is we're in the middle of the Cold War now, and we are trying to convince countries not to become communist and just to be democratic. And we don't look so good when we have racist laws on the books, like national origin quotas. This is one reason why some of the civil rights legislation was able to be passed as well. It was an attempt to show our best face to the world during this period where we're trying to stave off the growth of communism. The second reason why the Hart-Celler Act was able to pass and break up this this racial quota system, the overt racist laws, is because it really wasn't thought to change the face of immigration too much. Starting in the 30s, through the war and into the early 60s, immigration is at an all-time low. I'll show you in a graph in a minute. You can see how it just drops off dramatically with the Depression and stays quite low for a few decades. And so it really, even, you know, we were going to look good because we were going to pass this law that was going to be, you know, anti-racist, so to speak, but it really wasn't going to change up anything. The immigrant face was still largely going to be white. Senator Ted Kennedy said, and I quote, "It will not upset the ethnic mix of our society." So it was a way for senators and congressmen to get on board without really thinking they were going to break up the whiteness of the foreign-born population very much. But what does Hart-Celler do? So Hart-Celler creates our current immigration system, where you can immigrate through family or employers for the most part. There are these other very small ways you can immigrate legally as well, but the vast majority of visas given out are employment-based or family-based. So it firms up that framework, which we still have today, and it doesn't set it based on you know, your race or your nationality. It sets the caps hemispherically for the Eastern Hemisphere and the Western Hemisphere. And the result is an explosion in immigration from non-white areas. So here's a graph. I don't know how well you can see it. You can see on the left-hand side, that gray area with most of the immigrants, that's Europe, okay? And then you can see it drop off during Depression, during the wars, into the 60s. And then post-Hart-Celler, you can see how most of the immigrants that were coming are from Asia and Africa and the Americas. So Hart-Celler really did change the face dramatically of our foreign-born population. It's credited with breaking up the ability of only whites to immigrate. However, it did have some very, very negative implications. So we're going to turn to that now as we enter the covert racist era, and that starts in 1965, and we are still in it, people. So the first thing that Hart-Celler did is it created the quote unquote illegal alien, undocumented people. If you look at the left, you can see that bar graph. The purple section is immigration from Europe. So in 1960, the foreign-born population is 75% European or white, and only 25% people of color. Why? Because people of color were not allowed to immigrate legally. The door was wide open for whites. All whites could come in. For the most part, we got a little castus there starting in 1917, but for the most part, the door is wide open for whites. This positions whites to establish themselves legally in the United States, to build business, to bring their families, to create equity and wealth and prosperity, and they're the only ones that can naturalize. Post Hart-Celler, you have very limited ways for people to enter the United States. The door is much smaller now, right? So you can only get in through family or employers. As I said, there are some other little exceptions, but that's the main way. Like 85% of the visas given out every year are given out either through family-based immigration or employment-based immigration. And who is positioned to be those sponsors, those employer sponsors, or those family-based sponsors. It's white people. This is what I call immigration redlining, right? If any of you are familiar with the redlining practice of the 1950s and so forth, where whites had access to mortgages to buy homes, that permitted them to buy the homes, to create equity and prosperity, and blacks could not get those mortgages. It didn't mean that they couldn't buy a home, but it was much, much more difficult. And so it was much harder to establish yourself, buy a house, create equity and prosperity. And you get these great disparities between whites and blacks, including home ownership, but not just limited to home ownership. In the same way, are all those years of lawful migration of whites, of lawful naturalization of whites, redline whites, so that they could be in a position to benefit from Hart-Celler, that mechanism where only employers and a family can petition for other people. It doesn't mean that immigrants of color can't do that, right? We know there are employers who are immigrants of color that are able to sponsor other immigrants of colors. We know that there are immigrants of colors that are able to sponsor family members. It's just much harder because you're trying to undo decades and decades and decades of built up prosperity and equity and legality that whites had access to, but immigrants of colors did not. And so you can see in this graph, by 2019, you have a drop off in the foreign-born population. Why does this happen? And this happens because there's still an explosion of immigration, but you can't, there's no door for you to get through anymore. People are still going to migrate. So what happened after 1965? You have, among other things, there were a lot of factors in the explosion of migration. And that migration happened mostly from Africa and the Americas. You have the deconstruction of the colonial structure on those continents that opened up migration. People, in some cases fled instability. And so they came to the United States, and they had to come unlawfully in many cases because there was no longer a mechanism for them to get through those doors. So you have an explosion in the undocumented population, not just that, but there was throughout the 70s and into the 80s a reduction in the number of visas available. So for instance, in 76, the number of visas available were reduced to 20,000 a year. Then we got rid of the hemispheric caps and we set the worldwide visa limit at 290,000, and then we reduced it in 1980 to 270,000. So now you've got more non-whites immigrating, but fewer visas available. And so you have an explosion in the undocumented population, right? So here's, I'll skip that slide. Here's a graph of the undocumented Mexican population. And you can see that right at 1965, when Hart-Celler was passed, it starts to really explode, but it's not just Mexicans. Here is the estimated undocumented population starting in the late 60s. Obviously, we knew immigration was lower then anyways, but you really see a tremendous, tremendous growth in the undocumented population. And these are largely immigrants of color, because Europeans are no longer coming, and the immigrants who are coming primarily from non-white countries. So one of the biggest legacies of Hart-Celler is this concept of immigration redlining that permitted whites to continue to immigrate lawfully, members of the dominant class, and it did not create that same system for non-whites to legally, lawfully immigrate non-white immigrants. That's not all that happens in this covert racist period. We respond to the growth of the non-white immigrant population by criminalizing the alien. I could only find 2 instances prior to 1965, prior to this era, where there was this marriage between criminality and alienage. And the first was that Chinese Exclusion Act of 1892, which permitted the hard labor of Chinese people found to be living here illegally. And then I think it was about in the 1920s when we created the law that actually made illegal entry a crime. But we really embark on this odyssey post Hart-Celler, when the immigrant population becomes largely non-white. We embark on an odyssey to criminalize the alien. This is an example of terms that were used to describe non-citizens going back to 1945. So this particular study looked at newspaper articles from the New York Times, the Los Angeles Times, the Chicago Tribune. And you can see, you know, prior to 1965, 1970, when the immigrant population was largely white, there were not a lot of pejorative terms used to describe immigrants. Now, I want to take a step back because we all know that historically there were often pejorative terms used to describe immigrants. You know, you hear things about Irish people and French Canadians and whatnot. So it did happen, but it did not happen on an explosive scale until the foreign population starts to become non-white. Then you see this huge spike in pejorative language used to describe non-citizens. But not only that, it's not just pejorative language, but it's language about criminality. And there's this tying together of criminality and alienage. So you see a spike in the term illegal alien. You see a huge spike in the term illegal immigrant. And then we start passing laws that criminalize the alien. We just go on this huge odyssey to make it, to make alienage a criminal thing. So starting in 1986, we passed IRCA. IRCA did one good thing. It was the last time we had amnesty. So people who had been living here prior to 1980 without status were able to get status. However, it started imposing sanctions on employers who employed undocumented. It tightened up border security and did some other things. In 1988, you had the Anti-Drug Abuse Act passed, where we create for the first time this concept of aggravated felony. So a non-citizen could be removable if they're convicted of an aggravated felony. So in 1988, when they created this law, what's an aggravated felony? Murder, some drug trafficking crimes, illicit trafficking in firearms. And this law also provides for mandatory detention of non-citizens and starts expedited deportation. Okay, so we're making it a criminal act to, you know, to a removable act to be an alien with certain crimes, and we're making it easier to deport them. In 1990, we have another act that's passed that adds more crimes to the list of aggravated felonies. So money laundering, any term for which the term of imprisonment, even if it's suspended, is 5 years. And aggravated felons are excluded from being eligible for asylum or withholding. All right. Then in 1994, we have the Violent Crime Control and Law Enforcement Act.
We cannot hear you.
Dominique, you're, yeah, you muted yourself.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we have 2 acts passed in 1994. They add more crimes to the list of aggravated felonies. So trafficking in certain firearms, theft and burglary, certain offenses related to child pornography, income tax evasion, certain offenses related to peonage, slavery, involuntary servitude, espionage, sabotage. And then we also made it even easier to deport aggravated felons. So by 1994, we've got a laundry list of crimes that are considered aggravated felonies. Most, many of them you would never think. I don't like people who are income tax evaders or money launderers, but I don't think of that as an aggravated felony. In 1995, I don't know why my screen is no longer. Okay, you have the Oklahoma City bombing, which killed tragically, I think 168 people. The perpetrators were not immigrants, but this didn't stop Congress from passing further grounds, adding more things to the list of aggravated felonies. They include gambling, transportation, prostitutes, alien smuggling, falsely making, forging, counterfeiting a passport, failure to appear if the crime, the sentence imposed is 5 years or more, bribery, forging, or trafficking in vehicles where the identification number has been changed, obstruction of justice, failure to appear in court, and so forth. So we also add the 3 and 10-year bars to re-entry after unlawful presence here in the United States. And then in 1996, we also create, this communion between the federal government and law enforcement, which made it even easier for people to get picked up by ICE. In 1996, you also have the passage of IRA, which also added more grounds to aggravated felony. But one of the big things that happened in 1996 is it lowered that bar from 5 years of a sentence to 1 year. And what this means now is that you can be convicted of a misdemeanor and it could still be considered an aggravated felony. So we are 10 years into this odyssey of criminalizing the alien, and we have now swept up a huge number of non-citizens, including those who just have convictions for misdemeanors. Then obviously we have the terrorist acts of 2001, which broadened terrorism grounds and increased surveillance of foreign students. And so, we're at just an unprecedented scale here. This never existed before in the history of the United States. This marriage between criminality and non-citizenship never existed when the immigrants were largely white. And I want to point out 2 things that are really important. The first is that these laws have nothing to do with the rise in the undocumented population, because all of these laws about aggravated felony and who's removable and deportation don't apply just to undocumented people. They apply to all non-citizens. So in other words, you could be convicted of a misdemeanor that's considered an aggravated felony, like, say shoplifting or something like that, depending on your state, and you could be undocumented and therefore removable. But you could also be convicted of the same crime, be a lawful permanent resident for 30 years, have 6 US citizen children, and be removable. So these laws have nothing to do with an increase in the undocumented population. They also have absolutely nothing to do with rates of criminality among non-citizens. So this is a wonderful study coming out of Texas. For those of you, if it's hard to read, that blue color, the bar is US born citizens, the red color are legal immigrants, and the green color are undocumented immigrants. And Texas requires law enforcement to collect all kinds of data, including the race and the ethnicity of people they arrest, but also their immigration status. So we have really, really granular data from Texas. And this study looked at data from 2012 to 2018. And you can see here that except for traffic violations, I used to live in Rome, so I can attest that a lot of Romans, at least, are terrible drivers. But apart from traffic violations, non-citizens commit crimes at a lower rate, in some cases a far lower rate than US-born citizens. So all of these laws that have to do with the criminalization of non-citizens have absolutely nothing to do with actual criminality. And this is not anything new. I mean, there was a report done in the early 20th century, the Dillinger Commission, that studied this same thing. So about 120 years ago. And the report came out and said, quote, "No satisfactory evidence has been produced to show that immigration has resulted in an increase in crime disproportionate to the increase in adult population. Statistics obtained indicate that immigrants are less prone to commit crime than our Native Americans." Okay, so we know that this obsession with criminalizing non-citizens has nothing to do with the rise in the undocumented population, and it has nothing to do with actual criminality. And so we're left to determine what the intent was. Again, I don't want to focus intent, I want to focus on outcomes. I would tell you that the intent was racist, but regardless, it has had a disproportionate effect on immigrants of color, just like our criminal justice laws, which seem to be facially neutral, just like these, have had a disproportionate effect on Blacks and brown people here in this country. And we have that whole prison pipeline that we've created. The other thing that we do in this covert racist era, where we have facially neutral laws, is that we apprehend, detain, and deport people at unprecedented levels. So just let's go back. From 1892 to 1954, 12 million immigrants were processed through Ellis Island, our eastern entry point to the United States. This information is all from the National Park Service website. And the average processing time was 3 to 7 hours. Now, there was a small percentage of the population that were detained temporarily from 2 weeks to 2 years. I'm sure among them were people with lice, tuberculosis, etc. But the average processing times for a white immigrant is 3 to 7 hours. In fact, the detention of non-citizens, of aliens, was virtually non-existent by the 1950s. And the Supreme Court said in 1958, physical detention of aliens is now the exception, not the rule. Certainly, this policy reflects the humane qualities of an enlightened civilization. Well, we are no longer enlightened. This is what our removals and returns look like. This is from you can go on the DHS website and find all this data. 1892 to 2012. You see in the 40s and 50s, the huge spike. That is the deportation of Mexicans under multiple programs where we tried to get rid of Mexican labor after the Depression. But starting in 1965, when the immigrant population starts to become non-white, you see an explosion in removals and returns. You also see an explosion in apprehension. This is data from 1925 to 2018, both interior and at the border. And you see an explosion in the number of immigrants that are detained on a daily basis. So these are detention statistics, daily detention statistics from 1994. So hard into the years of criminalizing the alien to 2019. And there's a 7-fold increase in the daily detention rates. And mind you, these are non-whites. These are Black and brown non-citizens. And this really echoes the explosion in detention of Black people here in the United States through the criminal justice system. And so this, really reflects the rise in the non-white immigration. You have all of these laws that start to be passed. They are facially neutral. They don't mention race, but they have a disproportionate impact on immigrants of color, creating both, the undocumented alien and this huge detention, apprehension, removal pipeline that we have that exists now. So just what our system did, I mean, Hart-Celler did one good thing. It permitted the immigration of non-whites, but it created a framework where it was so hard to come here legally. So again, with redlining, you have people that are white positioned to petition for family members. They're more likely to own business and be able to petition for employees. And you have a much more difficult situation for non-whites. You have the creation of the undocumented immigrant, and you have the creation of a perpetual class of secondhand citizens. The undocumented have no access to healthcare insurance, often no access to employment authorization, often no access to a driver's license or to public benefits, despite the public perception otherwise. Often no access to post-secondary education or financial aid, no access to banking or home ownership, no access to petitioning for relatives or the ability to vote. This is what scholars call domestic colonialism. The US doesn't need to colonize another country like Portugal did, Spain, France, England. We can do it right here. We did it first with slavery. And now we've done it again with the undocumented alien. We have created a whole working class that cannot have full rights in our community, and they provide us with cheap labor and services. It's what scholars call domestic colonialism. Douglas Massey is considered sort of the godfather of this area of scholarship, the racial inequities in immigration law. And he said, quote, "Not since the days of slavery has so many residents of the United States lacked the most basic social, economic, and human rights." So where do we go from here? I am not a legislator. I am not an expert in this area. What I do know is that what's been proposed so far does not dismantle this racist system. It's just a drop in the bucket. So while I support like the American Dream and Promise Act that would legalize TPS holders and DACA holders, and I fully support that, but that would be like the Supreme Court saying in Brown v. Board of Education, separate but equal schools are unconstitutional, and so we're going to integrate just kindergarten. That's what these laws are like. They do not go far enough in dismantling a system that disproportionately affects negatively immigrants of color. We've got to do far more than that. I'm just going to throw out some ideas. The first is to roll back the criminalization of the non-citizen, seriously curtail the definition of aggravated felony. Doesn't make any sense anymore. It includes misdemeanors. It includes all kinds of crimes that no one would consider are an aggravated felony. Also align the definition of conviction, because as some of you may know, you can have a crime dismissed in court and still be considered convicted of it under immigration law. So align the definition of conviction in immigration law with criminal law. Create waivers to a lot of these rules and give judges back discretion to use them. Close down at least all private detention facilities and preferably all detention facilities, and return to a policy of rarely detaining immigrants that existed before, when immigrants were largely white. Stop sharing, this sharing between law enforcement and federal government that makes it easier to detain and deport people. Roll back the illegality of non-citizen, this structure that we have that makes it incredibly difficult for people to gain status. So for instance, get rid of the 3 and 10-year bar and the permanent bars to unlawful presence. Allow people who enter unlawfully to adjust status, as well as people who enter lawfully. Get rid of preference category visa limits, expand waivers, and seriously rethink a lot of our grounds of inadmissibility. For instance, just taking public charge, right? We created public charge to keep out non-white immigrants, Chinese people. It's a facially neutral law that we created way back when because we knew it would have an impact, or we hoped it would have an impact on keeping out people of color, and it certainly does. If you look at data from the Department of State, public charge and admissibility grounds are far more likely to be found for immigrants of color than for whites. You can look at the statistics. The Department of State website puts out their statistics for every year. So, I mean, just some of these inadmissibility issues that clearly disproportionately affect immigrants of color. And I think, you know, if we do some of these things, all of these things and more, then we can finally live up to our aspirational goals that are on some of our most favored documents and our monuments. We are not living up to these goals right now. But I think that if we seriously dismantle this racist immigration system that we have had since the inception of the United States, we might start living up to those goals. So I'm going to open it for questions while I show my source material. So I don't know if there are any questions.
Yes, and we'll take it back from here. Yeah, we can entertain at least 3 or 4 questions. And if you would please raise your hand so that we can recognize you, that would be very helpful. Thank you. Your presentation was very comprehensive, Dominique, and really, really not only, you know, teaches us about our past, but actually your recommendations at the very end are very useful. Does anybody have any questions? Fazia, I'm gonna bring you back in. I don't know if you have, because I have you and Stephanie Barnes as well. So I don't know if Stephanie, oh, let me see. S. Diaz Wells has a question. Go ahead, can you please unmute yourself?
Thank you. Could you, Ms. Dominique, could you talk just a small bit about the Bracero Act that you went by so quickly? I only know a portion of it. I would really like to hear your take on it because I found that to be extremely damaging when I did my 1.5 years of becoming a accredited representative.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so sorry. I mean, I was just trying to crush this into a shorter period of time, so I did skip that. Yeah, the Bracero program, you know, we had a period of time when we deported Mexicans and Mexican Americans during the Depression. You know, there was a slogan that Hoover had, American jobs for real Americans. Presumably that meant white Americans. And there was this thought that Mexican and Mexican Americans were taking away jobs from white people. So records were not well kept, but we think around between 400,000 and 1 million Mexicans were deported from land that historically been part of Mexico. And many of those were actually US citizens. And then you had the war years, where there was a shortage of labor. And so we created the Bracero program, which is basically a temporary migrant worker program that enabled some Mexicans to enter and do labor in the United States. And they weren't enough visas, and it was still a fairly racist program. Like, you know, the people that came in under the Bracero program couldn't unionize, they couldn't send their kids to schools, actually. And then after the Korean War, we go into another little depression, and so that changes the thought process again. We don't want these non-white laborers in the United States. They're taking jobs away from white people. And so we initiate what's called, and this is the real name, Operation Wetback, it was called, where we again deported Mexicans back to Mexico from land that again has historically been part of Mexico. And again, once again, probably a number of US citizens were deported in that program as well. But that program predates and then also coincides, overlaps a little bit with the passage of the Hart-Celler Act in 1965. So really, for Mexicans, the termination of the Bracero program and the expulsion of Mexicans through Operation Wetback and the passage of Hart-Celler was just a death knell for any type of legal migration to land which, you know, historically had been theirs. So yeah, and you know, the Bracero program is very similar to our temporary farm worker program in some ways, because it didn't really permit those individuals from becoming full members of our community.
And Dominique, I have a question here. Alice Folks is asking, how can we reduce the influence of FAIR and other groups that continually promote false views of immigrants and write laws for local legislators and leaders at the federal level?
So I didn't understand, what was the first part of that question? How can we
reduce the influence of FAIR and you know, just for people.
Fear, okay, yeah. Well, you know, I think
organization, I mean, I just wanted to, you know, mention it's an organization that actually is nationally known to provide basically the writing of laws, and it is an anti-immigrant organization. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, one of the things that I really want there to be a shift in focus from intent to outcomes. I think people get too caught up in whether a particular law had a racist intent or not. And it's really irrelevant, because if a law or a policy or a regulation has a disproportionate negative impact on individuals of color, immigrants or not, then it is a racist law. And so, you know, you can see with, you know, with the covert racist period that we're in now, these are all facially neutral laws. They may have been passed with a racist intent, I don't know, but I don't want to waste any time discerning whether, you know, the framers of these laws were racist or not. That's a waste of our time. So we really need to shift and focus on outcomes. And that's much easier to discern and much easier than to frame legislation.
Right. And yes, somebody was asking if the word FAIR is an acronym. And yes, it is. We unfortunately are lacking sometimes, and I see here that somebody else is writing. I don't know if the person wants to unmute herself and ask the question in a shorter form. Elisa or Eliza, are you there?
Yes, hello.
Oh yes, hi. Yeah.
This is Elizabeth Michelson. I'm a resident of Winchester. I have a question about the supposedly nation's only ICE detention center for juveniles. We have a Democratic majority in City Council, but in spite of that, we have a ICE contract for taking in juveniles into our normal juvenile facility here. And there was a young boy from El Salvador who was in here for 9 months and recently released. Before that, he was also close to a year in a similar facility, which is now closed in Seattle, Washington. He entered the US in 2017 with his mother, and he is a resident of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. It's still unclear what exactly his quotation mark crime was. He had an attorney in Charlottesville that got him released. As soon as he was released, they said in a local newspaper article here that a 14-year-old boy was I just want to find out if there's anything I can do.
Excuse me. Elsa, please mute yourself. Thank you. Yes, Elizabeth, go ahead. Elizabeth,
Okay.
yeah, conclude your question. Thank you.
So I just, I have gone to city council and I have spoken at public comment time, but the contract was still recently renewed in February. And we still have this situation that they can get over $200,000 to take in these young people and keep them there. And we have no insight into what's going on.
Yeah, well, I would just offer that you should partner with organizations that are working to end ICE incarceration. I don't know if anybody from LAJC is on the call still, but I believe that they might be working on this, but there's still plenty of other organizations, both at the state level and the national level, that are working with this. So you probably don't want to go it alone, and you probably want to partner with somebody that can help you advocate for that change.
Yeah, and actually, let me just recommend that you please join us tomorrow as we continue our summit. And we are going to be actually delving deeply into the federal immigration laws and so forth. And we are about almost ready to conclude, but I didn't want to leave without giving Stephanie Barnes a little moment to say a few words, if you wouldn't mind.
Sure. No, I just appreciate Dominique being able to give the presentation. We had talked about something like this before to just give the context. So I think that was perfect. Just thank you for that great information. And I think just making us not rely on the assumptions that that things are natural that we are trying to confront right now, is that these were created, and so we can uncreate them. So thank you, Dominique and Basia, for being the other facilitator. And I think Mary is here.
Yeah, do you have some last words? Do you want to add anything, Fazia?
I would just say this is so layered. I really appreciate this so much. And which goes to for the people we consider undocumented. I just wanted to say that this comment might not be for them, but for those of us that can vote, it is very important for us to engage and be there, in the voting realm. So I just wanted to add that. Thank you so much.
Thank you so very much. And I would like to deeply thank Fazia Dean, Stephanie Barnes, and very, very much have so much to say about Dominique's presentation. It's so comprehensive. It was a great education presented here. And thank you for putting in the link that people can access. Actually, the link themselves and look at it in more detailed manner. So Dominique, do you have anything else that you want to add to conclude?
No, but thank you. And I'm sorry I had to compress the presentation so much, but anyways, I appreciate everyone being so graceful to listen to me for an hour.
Well, no, thank you so much. It was very, very useful to all of us. And again, this is our closing. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining us today and for the valuable advocacy on behalf of our community that we know all of you being here do. And so we cannot thank you enough, because it is only with unity and with all the organizations that work tirelessly is that we can bring to you this 12th immigrant advocacy summit. And so again, let me remind you that we have another day tomorrow where we ask you to join us. And we are gonna have 3 topics that I know will be very interesting to all of us. And one of them is the Virginia and the federal landscape of immigration. So let's return to this topic tomorrow. Then the second topic for tomorrow is abolishing immigration detention in Virginia and beyond. And then the third topic is race, ethnicity, and criminal justice. And before we conclude, I again want to acknowledge all the sister organizations that are joining us in this effort. So our sincere appreciation to all our moderators and our panelists today. And again, thank you to the American Civil Liberties Union, People Power Fairfax, Centerville Immigration Forum, Congregation Action Network, Dar Al-Hirga Islamic Center, Drive Virginia Forward, Dreamer Mothers in Action, Edu-Futuro, Just Neighbors, Legal Aid Justice Center, Sin Barreras, Virginia Interfaith Center for Public Policy, the Virginia Coalition for Immigrant Rights, and my own organization, the Virginia Coalition of Latino Organizations. Everyone, have a wonderful day today, and we'll see you here tomorrow.